Jo, grüßt euch. Bisschen spät heute. Bisschen Musik kurz. So. Ja. Ich war echt am Überlegen. Ich hatte ja gestern. Sorry. Also die, wo gestern durchgehalten haben, die 4 Stunden. Ähm, Ich hoffe, sie sind soweit wieder fit. Schreibt mal in den Kanal. Ich habe ja schon begrüßt. Ob ihr alle fit seid. Heute wird es nicht so lang. Heute wird es ein bisschen. Ich mache mal eine Cinema-Runde. Ich mache das gerne mal so zwischendrin, so Cinema nenne ich das Ganze. Einfach mal ein Video starten, ohne viel Gequatsche. Ähm, Es gibt eine interessante Videoreihe, die habe ich mir schon auf die Playlist gelegt für euch. Ich werde die mal so Stück für Stück, das sind so ungefähr 6 CDs von dem einen. Von einer Frau, die momentan sehr viral auch durch verschiedenen Medien gepostet wird und sehr interessante Aspekte bringt. Und ich habe euch hier eine Version raus, die überarbeitet worden ist über diesen Metatron. Wir haben dieses Thema, das nennt sich Cube. Es dürfte vielleicht einige von euch wissen. Cube. Was das Cube symbolisiert. The Black Cube. Das Kreuz. Was ist das Kreuz? Wir reden von dem Kreuz in der Kirche. Es symbolisiert den Cube. Den Saturn. Und mal davon jetzt abgesehen, dieses Thema werde ich auch nochmal, ich habe heute echt interessante Videos noch geguckt. Es ist sehr, ja, ich hatte auch ein Video übrigens veröffentlicht, was den Cube beschreibt. Warte mal, lasst mich mal gucken kurz. Da. Das müsste ich echt mal überlegen. Gehen wir mal in den Videos. Das müsste ein Special gewesen sein, so viel ich weiß. Cube. Wie hieß das Video mit dem Cube? Es ist immer so, ja, wie sag ich, so ungünstig. Man sucht sich so spezielle Überschriften und dann kann man sich selber nicht mehr dran erinnern, welche Überschrift man genommen hat. Ich werde es dann nachher im Chat noch reinschreiben und euch verlinken, das Video, wo es um den Cube geht. Warte mal, ich hab's bestimmt gleich. So lange ist es ja noch nicht her. Ihr könnt trotzdem gerne schreiben. Gern geschehen. Leute, ich suche immer wirklich interessante Videos und vieles hinterfragen. Immer hinterfragen. Ich sage nicht, das ist so, aber es sind immer Aspekte drin. Und das Video von gestern, diese 3-4 Stunden, ich arbeite daran, immer einzelne Themen herauszunehmen und dann mit euch die zusammen besprechen. Sag mal, das kann jetzt wohl nicht sein. Ich habe doch Tube. Warte mal, war das Portal? Also hier zum Beispiel Mandela-Effekt 2. Würde ich euch empfehlen. Ich muss jetzt dazu sagen, so die ersten Livestreams, das sind ja so die Anfänger, so da macht man halt so, ne, der Ton und so weiter. Sehr interessant, dass wir ja auf einer 2D-physischen Ebene leben und der Cube symbolisiert ja auch die Matrix, die 3D-Ebene. Mandela-Effekt 1 habe ich das auch schon so ein bisschen angesprochen. Wo habe ich das Video mit dem Cube? Leute, helft mir mal. Ich bin jetzt echt orientierungslos, weil ich habe das jetzt hier wirklich spontan. Ich liebe es, spontan Livestream zu machen. Was sind Vulkane? Science Fiction. Der Schlaf. Skulptur. Das war nach Skulptur, so viel ich weiß. Was ist das hier? Lass uns mal kurz reingucken. Ein bisschen.
Denkprozess verlangsamt sich.
Nee, das ist es nicht. Das ist das. Wo ist meine Maus? Oh, jetzt geht das nicht. Kann ja wohl jetzt nicht wahr sein. Warte mal, Windows-Taste. So, jetzt. Meine Maus sehe ich hier auf dem OBS, aber nicht auf dem Monitor. Hier ist es. Bin ja immer parallel dabei. Also wie gesagt, da geht es ja um die Saturn-Moon-Matrix. Der Mond, was repräsentiert auch der Mond? Der Mond repräsentiert sozusagen den Seelenfänger. Dann wirst du recycelt und dann wirst du wieder schwuppsdiwupps hierher gefrachtet. Wie gesagt, das ist ein interessantes Thema. Hier ist es, der Würfel, oder?
Haben wir, unsere Realität zu beeinflussen, unseren
Ja.
physischen Körper und somit unser Glaube. Das ist nicht dasselbe wie die Gehirnfrequenzen. Höhere Beta-Frequenzen des Gehirns entsprechen einer niedrigen Körper-Geistschwingung.
Wo haben wir das
Weglassen
mit
einer höheren
dem
Frequenz
Würfel?
deutet darauf hin, dass wir weniger dicht werden. Dies ist derzeit eine sehr dichte Ebene, aber es muss keine
Ja, also wie gesagt, das Video hier, der Würfel, könnt ihr euch gerne mal anschauen. Das ist eine Übersetzung von diesem Kanal. Das ist, glaube ich, Paradise irgendwas. Warte mal, in der Beschreibung habe ich das, glaube ich, reingeschrieben. Ja, aus dem Kanal Paradise irgendwas. Weiß ich mich zu erinnern. Ich habe ihn ja abonniert. Der hat sehr viele Videos. Ah, hier, guck mal. The Womb of Creation. Gestern hatten wir das im Video, The Womb, ne? Also dieses Mutterleib, das Baby und das Auge. So, hier haben wir wieder dieses Bild, das dürfte euch bekannt sein. Und da wird jetzt das Video heute auch so ein bisschen, hat das auch was damit zu tun, ne? Also hier mit dem Tree of Life, Baum des Lebens, hier sozusagen die flache Erde, hier unten the Black Sun, hier oben Sonne, Mond und so weiter. Also wie gesagt, schaut euch das in Ruhe an. Ich würde es heute nicht zeigen, weil ich möchte heute wirklich nicht so lange streamen. Ich möchte einfach so eine Stunde, anderthalb mit euch Zeit verbringen. Wir schauen uns das mal an. Hier geht es auch, wie gesagt, um Frequenzen. Das haben wir ja schon öfters. Aber da war noch ein anderes Video, ich bin mir da sicher. Da war noch ein ganz anderes Video. Die neue Art war es auch nicht. Ich suche es raus, ich verlinke euch das. Wir wollen jetzt hier zu diesem hier gehen. Mit dem Saturn und mit dem, wie gesagt, mit dem Würfel werden wir auch nochmal drauf zurückkommen. Aber jetzt lasst uns einfach mal hier uns das Video mal in Ruhe anschauen. Geht so circa eine Stunde, ihr seht es hier unten. The Fall of Metatron. Das ist eine Serie von, warte mal, ich suche euch das hier nochmal raus. Fall of Metatron. Dann wisst ihr auch, und zwar geht es hier um diese Frau. Hier. Sie hat verschiedene Serien rausgebracht. Ich suche jetzt gerade den Kanal von ihr. War das hier Voyagers? Stopp. Das sind wie gesagt 6 DVDs. 3 Stunden. Ich würde ja, also wie gesagt, übersetzen. Nee, das sprengt den Rahmen. Ich zeige die gerne in der Cinema. Wir fangen heute, wie gesagt, mit dem hier mal an. Das ist, wie gesagt, eine überarbeitete Version. Und ich habe noch die anderen 6 DVDs extra mir runtergeladen, reuploadet und ich werde sie im Tartaria TV zeigen. Ja, Tartaria TV. Das heißt, sucht ihr hier, wenn ihr das jetzt nicht wisst, verlinkt ist es bei uns im Profil, hier auf diesem YouTube-Kanal. Gebt ihr ein Tartaria TV und dann schwuppsiwupps seid ihr hier. Und dort werde ich die Streams machen. Und ich habe auf Telegram heute ein Video hochgeladen. Es geht definitiv nicht hier auf YT. Ich habe es auf Telegram gemacht. Ich war es auf Odyssee am Versuchen, aber Odyssee hat irgendwie Probleme. Ich weiß nicht, ich habe jetzt x-mal dekodiert. Er hat nichts angenommen. Also ich bin da jetzt noch am Recherchieren. Vielleicht werde ich auch einen Livestream dort einfach machen, um das Video sozusagen hochzuladen. Ansonsten ist es in Telegram jetzt verfügbar. Könnt ihr euch gerne anschauen. Ich kann es hier leider nicht zeigen. Ihr wisst warum. Wir ersparen uns den Ärger. Und hier auf diesem Tartaria Videoportal, also unser Hauptchannel, werde ich das auch nicht posten. Es geht um Operation Fisch und Bowle. Jetzt wird ihr wissen, wovon ich rede. Wo verschiedene Tests gemacht worden sind. Schaut euch das Video an. Ich habe das mit deutschen Untertiteln gemacht, extra für euch, weil es nur auf diversen Kanälen auf rein Englisch ist. Und ich möchte das gerne, dass für die Leute, für euch hier im deutschen Sprachraum wenigstens diese Originalaufnahmen mit deutschen Untertiteln ihr euch anschauen könnt. Also ich habe hier extrem viel Probleme gehabt, es hier auf YT zu machen. Es ging nicht. Ich habe das ein bisschen austricksen können, aber jetzt im Gesamten kann ich euch das Video hier wirklich nicht präsentieren. Nee, da laufen wir hier Gefahr. Und auf Odyssee, den Kanal von Odyssee habt ihr auch noch von uns. Das ist unser Backup-Kanal. Odyssee. Und hier seht ihr auch die Kanäle. Warte mal, ich mach's mal hier so. Tartaria. Sollte eigentlich zu finden sein. Hoffe ich. Hoffe ich nicht. Guck mal, ich bin noch gar nicht. Also, hier, guck mal, hier ist er schon. Hier, Tartaria. Und da sind alle Videos, was ihr hier auf YouTube findet, auch. Und wenn ich solche Themen mache, wie diese Fish Operation, dann werde ich die Streams hier drüber machen. Tut euch da eventuell auch absichern, macht euch da ein Abo. Sollte hier auf YT, was ich sehr stark vermute, ich habe hier so ein Gefühl, dass wir hier nicht mehr senden können, werde ich das vorübergehend auf Odyssey oder Rumble. Ich habe alle möglichen Plattformen mich mal schon für uns hier eingetragen, dass wir da hin und her hupsen können. So, das nochmal so als Info für euch. Ansonsten würde ich sagen, wir fangen einfach mal mit dem Video an. Metatron, wie gesagt, der Ursprung ist der Cube. Aber es beinhaltet noch sehr, sehr viel mehr. Und hier ist auch ein Aspekt über diese Geschichte. Ich würde sagen, lass uns einfach mal anfangen. Deutscher Untertitel dürfte an sein. Und sollte irgendwelche Probleme mit Ton oder sonst irgendwas sein, mir sofort im Chat bitte Bescheid sagen. Ich bin ja dabei, genieße mit euch zusammen jetzt mal das Video. Also, ich halte jetzt die Klappe und viel Spaß euch beim Zuschauen.
There's a very long history here that has to do with Metatronics, and it has to do with a being called Metatron, and it has to do with the A.Arhayas. When we get into Metatronics, Metatron, who is Metatron? Where'd that word come from? Metatron is the name of a family collective. It's a family collective out of an entity. Now, an entity is something above a rishi, the first level of ascended masters, consciousness collective. There's an entity called Giovanni. Giovanni was an entity in good standing, as most entities are. Giovanni was part of the collective that created the Christos founders races that seeded this time matrix 950 billion years ago. It was the groups of Elohim that were commissioned to Stargate 11, which was Avion in Lyra. They were commissioned as the guardians, the Christos founders guardians of Stargate 11, that became convoluted, code convoluted, which began their downfall, both genetically, template-wise, and of consciousness. That particular group were out of the entity called Giovanni. Because of the fall that took place, the genetic fall and the creation of the black hole that I'll talk about in a minute, it was created 250 billion years ago, the entity Giovanni fell. Because there's a law of physics that applies. If you are an ascended master being, you have your pieces up there, your parts of self stationed out of the time matrix. You send in X amount of energy of yourself into the matrix. If you sent in, and most don't, but on occasion, as an ascended master collective will send in more than a natural proportion of its energy into the matrix, say for a salvage mission. If the salvage team you sent in goes down too, it takes the whole collective down. So there was an entity that fell as a result of what took place 250 billion years ago. 250 billion years ago, an event took place in the Lyra star system, the cradle of Lyra, with the Christos founders races, the races from Stargate 11, the guardians of Avion Gate 11, and the guardians of Gate 10, which is Vega Lyra, began to war with each other because both of them suffered code convolution. The Omicron Draconian races, who were of the Seraphim, were the Gate 10 guardians, and a particular group out of the Giovanni entity of Elohim were the guardians of Gate 11. Both of them were getting a bit out of hand as far as taking a free will concept and literally turning it in on itself and becoming authoritarian. Because free will and authoritarian dictatorship do not go hand in hand. They are in direct opposition. Both of them began to play that game with each other. And after a while of the D11 Elohim pushing the Draconians around, the Draconians managed to evolve in a certain way that they were a bit stronger. So they began to take back territory. They began to push back. And at this point, the Elohim commissioned High Council, which were the ones who were guardians, the Elohim, the Elohai Elohim, who were guardians of Gate 12, and they said, these guys are out of control. We want you to destroy them. And we said, excuse me, we don't destroy anybody. By the way, did you notice that you've been out of control for a while, too? Why don't we all sit down and figure out how we can help both of you heal? They didn't like that answer. They threatened High Council that if you don't destroy them, we'll destroy them. And not only that, we will destroy your gate and you as well, and we will take over the Matrix. That was a very sick decision to make. It was a choice that was made because they had an idea. These were creator God people. These were Elohim that knew just almost as much as the other Elohim. They knew that if Source could create using the template that we talked about yesterday in the Dance Floor programs, where you have 15 spheres, well, what if you took just 7? They knew there was a way to bend the mathematics, which would bend the light and the sound and the scalar waves into a form that could actually repel itself and cut itself off from the natural matrix. It would still exist within the entire matrix, but it would be their own system. They decided they wanted to turn this time matrix into that, which was a direct violation of something called the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant was the original agreement that the Giannis Ascended Masters agreed upon when they decided to create this time matrix together. It was a free will system, and it was built upon the law of one, which is acknowledgement that we are all of the same source, and that loving co-creation is the only sane and natural way of being in an understanding of yourself as part of the one. That was the original tenets and precepts by which this matrix was created. The Elohim of Gate 11 decided that they were going to do it different. They were going to break that covenant, and they were going to destroy the races who wouldn't cooperate with them, and they were going to take it over and run it their way. The only thing standing in their way of doing that were the Elohai Elohim of Gate 12. They could dominate the things lower in coding than them. They could, when push came to shove, use their ability to run higher frequency because they had the D11 coding. The Seraphai Seraphim had D10 coding. So they could, if they wanted to, use that superiority and ability to run frequency to get rid of the draconian races. But they would have a hard time doing it to get rid of the Elohai Elohim races because they had D12 and higher capacity. But there is a way to turn the natural physics of creation in on itself. If you can think of the Cathara grid and the Stargate systems as a conduit of energy, and when energy is coming into the matrix, it spirals down through the primal light and sound fields into D12 and then D11, 10, 9, 8. Now, if you block energy at gate 11, the energy is still coming in through 12, but it bounces back. And it creates a backflow that amplifies. So you can, and it was theoretic at that point, theoretically, you could sever the connection at gate 12 and have gate 11 and down be your own little universe if you wanted to hijack it. That was their idea. It worked. And there was a choice that the Elohai made. There was a choice to defend or to allow. Now the Elohai knew that they were eternal. Death isn't something that frightened them. They were completely beyond that. They knew that if they were to defend themselves, because they had superior power capacity, that those who attempted to destroy them would literally have the energy bounce back at themselves and literally wipe them out and the systems they were connected to. It would not only take out the Elohim that were posing the challenge, it would take out the Seraphai Seraphim, both the fallen ones, and a group called the Odedicron. The Odedicron were a race of Seraphai Seraphim who had co-governance over Stargate 10, Vega, with the Omicron Draconians. The Odedicrons were the reptilians. There was a difference between the Draconians and the reptilians. The Draconians were the dragon moth people. They were the dinoids. They created dinosaur-like, as opposed to snake-like, as opposed to smaller reptilian. The Omicron dragon moth dinoids were fully involved in the competition for the time matrix. They knew what the Elohim were going to do, and they decided they would do it too. They didn't petition for help. They said, fine, we'll both get rid of them, and then we'll go after each other and see who gets the matrix. But the Odedicron, the reptilians, didn't want to play the game. They were stuck in the Gate 10 system, and they petitioned for help. But because you had Gate 11 and the Elohim in the middle, in between Gate 12 and Gate 10, we weren't able to rescue or get the Odedicron out. So if the decision to defend by simply putting up a shield around Gate 12 was chosen, it would have taken out both Gate 11 and Gate 10, which could have been repaired. It would have taken a long time, but it could have been repaired using Gate 12. But those consciousness that were in those systems would be fragmented back to space dust. They'd still be part of God, as I've said. You can never be not part of God. But races that had beautiful potential, and they'd already come a long way in their evolution. They'd evolved from 950 billion years ago to 250 billion years ago. That's a lot of evolution. And they had reached wondrous things in their own right in certain ways. It was primarily because of the Odedicron, of the reptilians, that the founders chose to allow, knowing they were taking a burden onto themselves. But it was the only way that if they allowed it, they would slowly be able to heal it. They knew a black hole would be created if this were allowed. They tried to talk them out of it, but they didn't want to listen. The Elohim did not want to listen. Instead of defending themselves, they allowed the Elohim to back up Gate 11 and reverse it. And that created a backflow, and it literally shattered the divine blueprint and blew up the stargates in Lyra Aramatana. That would have to be reassembled later using the D13 and higher primal light fields to reset the pattern. It created a black hole system. That black hole system came to be known as Phantom Matrix. Phantom Matrix was originally a part of this time matrix. Phantom Matrix started with simply part of the D11 Avion gate and what was that planetary system or star system, and the D10 Vega Lyra system. But it grew much bigger than was ever intended. When the Phantom Matrix was created by the Anu Elohim, they came to call themselves the Anu Elohim. The Giovanni entity hadn't fully fallen. A portion of that entity had fallen. And because of that, it sent another portion of itself into the matrix to try to rescue the part of itself that had fallen. That was a risky thing to do because, again, it comes down to how much energy is on which side. Normally, an entity would put X amount of itself into the matrix at one time. Well, it already lost a big chunk of itself, so it put more of itself in. And there was a chance that was taken. If that part ended up getting distorted also and wasn't strong enough to pull the others back out, it would make more critical mass of reversed mess in the matrix than what the collective had itself, the Ascended Master collective had itself. And that is what happened, but it happened in stages. When the original fall happened, the original sin, when Stargate 11 blew up 250 billion years ago and Phantom Matrix was created, there were precautionary things put in motion, knowing that it was going to occur. There was something called the Eye of Brahman that was created at D12.5. Now that was a little bit beyond the D12 Stargate. The Eye of Brahman was a polarization refraction lens that would allow the primal light fields from the natural to this time matrix to refract through and literally anchor into the Phantom Matrix, to hold it, to give it a structure so it could begin to restructure itself instead of going completely back to space dust. Because what happens when a black hole is created? A template is shattered like a crystal that's crushed with a hammer. It gets twisted, the energy gets twisted and reversed, but if it has any portion of its template that has enough frequency, it can begin to accrete again. What usually happens in a black hole system is it accretes like to like frequency, but is missing pieces, and it isn't able to accrete functionally. So it accretes on a distorted template compared to its original mathematics. The Eye of Brahman was intended to allow the pattern of the natural template of this time matrix to be put back in to Phantom Matrix. So when it began to reaccrete itself and the consciousness began to pull itself together, it would still have, eventually, after it accreted enough, it would have access to getting plugged back in to its original divine blueprint. That was the original intention. So there was a lens, the first eye, the Eye of Brahman, created. And it was created by the Christos founders and the Janus Ascended Masters races in order to give the beings that would be caught in the black hole system an opportunity to re-evolve instead of being blown back to space dust. And again, it was done primarily because you had several innocent races, but primarily the Odedicron, who had been persecuted by the Draconian races progressively more and more. There was no way they could get out of the system, and they had always been in good standing with the Christos founders races. So there was a commitment made on behalf of them, but also on behalf of the others, because even though the Anu Elohim had gone off on their own tangent and become very dangerous creator gods, they had become anti-creator gods, anti-Christic creator gods, they were still loved, and there was still if there's life, there's hope, hopefully. So it was a decision of love, but it was a decision of accepting, out of love, accepting a huge, massive responsibility. The responsibility of knowing how dangerous this healing experiment could be. Because if it went wrong, if it went bad, it could not only take down this whole matrix, but if it did, that would allow it to have enough frequency where it could begin to poke holes into other time matrices as well. It wasn't a decision that was made by a couple of people. It was a decision that was made through the Ascended Masters' Janus councils of various different time matrices that could be directly affected if it went wrong and if it went bad. There was a whole lot of them that didn't want it tried. But there was enough, and it came down to a vote. And it came down to some of the older time matrices that were much older than 950 billion years old, had been through something similar to this long time before and didn't work. I said, okay, you guys have a good idea, sweet children. You really, really, really want to try it now. You've looked at what could happen. The outcome, if it's successful, we will look up to you because we tried a similar thing when a similar thing happened in our matrices, but it didn't work, and it created absolute havoc. We would have liked for it to work. So, because we would like to know where we went wrong, maybe you can do it better. And if you're willing to take responsibility, that means you don't get out of there. If it goes bad, you stay in there until you fix it, right? So it doesn't hurt anything else. So the creator gods, the Anu Elohim and the Seraphai Seraphim and the Brahma races that were the original 3 Christos founders races of this matrix, and their Janus Ascendant Masters collective said, yeah, we want to try. So the permission was given for us to try, and that's why the Eye of Brahman was allowed to be set up. So the phantom matrix wouldn't just go back into implosion within itself, because when a system goes into black hole and it begins to accrete, it will accrete to a certain point where it begins to literally pull energy from itself, because it pulls all its pieces together and it has nothing left to do but continue to pull. And it pulls itself into compaction, and it goes into what's called molecular compaction or atomic compaction, and it implodes on itself. It has to do with magnetic and electrical fields. So, by setting up the Eye of Brahman, there was an opportunity being made where the black hole would accrete, but at a certain point in its accretion, it would reach enough frequency in reverse that it could possibly be plugged in to the D13 primal light fields so it could be brought back around. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try, at least so we thought at the time. Well, when this occurred, one of the big heroes in the drama was going to be Giovanni. Giovanni wanted to make sure, because Giovanni felt responsible, because it was Giovanni's family that had created the fallen Anu Elohim. There's a particular collective of the Giovanni family, like a smaller family within a family, that was called Metatron. Metatron, at a certain point, became directly involved. Now the Eye of Brahma was set up 250 billion years ago in preparation for, it was actually set up before they did the final blowing up of Stargate 12. That's when the decision to allow was given. Once the Stargate blew up, the Eye of Brahman activated, and it began to hold the phantom matrix from totally going into reversal, where it dropped so low in frequency that you couldn't plug into it anymore. And there was a degree of successful evolution between 250 billion years ago and 150 billion years ago. We got a lot of the Decoded races out, and even some of the fallen Anu Elohim and fallen Draconian races were able to do bioregenesis and get back out into the natural matrix. There was a problem that was manifesting itself in relation to some of the Anu Elohim that were being rehabilitated, the ones that had been out of the Metatron Giovanni collective. You could get them out to about D11, and then they were what's called host matrix, because they didn't have the D12 frequency anymore. They were hosted into another collective of the Brahma races. So you ended up with a hybrid, because the Brahma races had the lowest frequency of the Christos founders races. So the Anu Elohim had the second highest before they couldn't plug into their own matrix, so they were hosted through the Brahma races. But they still held a mentality, even after they would undergo hosting of dictatorial type governments. Their distortions had gone so deep, and because they still didn't have a full D12 pattern back, at D12 you start to get something. You start to get it consciously. You start to feel it. We are all one. That means I am you and you are me. That means I treat you the way I would want to be treated. That means we cooperate and not fight. Without the full D12 pattern, that cognition cannot fully come in. So they still didn't have that cognition. They began to pose a danger to, even when they'd be hosted out, they were posing a danger to the Brahmarama races. So there was another decision made, and this is where Metatron came in full force. There was another lens put in, another polarization refraction lens. The original one stayed, the Brahmarama, or the Brahman, the Eye of Brahman stayed. That was to hold Phantom Matrix intact. This other lens, that was called the Eye of Yahweh, or Yod-He-Vod-He, was put in. It was the Metatronic eye. It was put in to allow a, shortcut. So the races, the fallen Anu Elohim races, because they were still posing a danger, where they could do a shortcut. They didn't have to make it all the way up to D12. They could do a shortcut into another matrix that was actually more authoritarian. It was not a matrix that was originally created on a free will system. It was a healing matrix, almost like how you look at our, perhaps our prisons for violent criminal type people. And it was agreed, the Metatron and the Giovanni entity agreed that their races needed rehabilitation, more strict rehabilitation. They were still not capable of functioning fairly in a free will system. They would abuse if they were given power. And because of that, the Metatron collective created, and were permitted to create, the Eye of Metatron, or the Eye of Yahweh. They're one and the same. This lens was supposed to, it was positioned at D11.5, which is between gate 11 and gate 12. All right, so it wasn't as high up in frequency as the Eye of Brahman. And it was they would be able to evolve and get that mathematical coding, and then it would take them over into another matrix system. And it was actually another black hole system that had made some progress. It was the original one from way back that the other time matrices, the other Giannis Ascendant Masters had said, well, we tried and it didn't work. Right. They were still trying to heal and rehab that one, and there were certain portions of it that were rehabbing. They were partially successful. So it was decided by the Metatron entity and its Giovanni collective and the Ascendant Masters collectives that the ones that were causing problems, they could, for the Brahmarama races, would be hosted out into this matrix where they could finish their evolution there. All right. This was originally supposed to be an evolutionary shortcut, because in certain terms, if they were successful there, it would take them less time to evolve back into full ascended mastery than if they stayed here to fully regenerate the Christos template. There were certain perks for them to go. It was originally called the Path of Arimathea. It had to do with a planet or a star called Arimatzus that was part of this matrix. Now, Arimatzus, at the time that these decisions were made to allow the Eye of Metatron to be put in, Arimatzus was kind of like a crown jewel in that particular fallen matrix, because it was beginning to get its D11.5 frequencies back, where it was this close to being able to go back into being reversed to a D12 natural pattern. So there was this chance taken by putting in the Metatronic Eye, or the Eye of Yahweh, that would create a link between that system. It was supposed to be a one-way link. You could go this way, but they could not come this way. All right, that was to protect this matrix. And it didn't link into this matrix, it linked into Phantom, and Phantom linked into here. Well, large numbers of the fallen Anu Elohim did evolve out via the Eye of Metatron, or the Eye of Yahweh. And then a problem happened over in Aramat. We call it Aramat for short. In Aramatzus, the new influx of the still semi-distorted consciousness from this matrix got together with a distorted consciousness from other systems in that matrix and invited them up to Aramatsus. And together they took over Aramatsus. And this created a situation for the Giovanni Metatron family. They were losing some of the guardian ones that they had sent in to assist had actually gone into the phantom matrix and escorted the others out into the other matrix. And when there were rebellions over in their system, it was called the Wisadek system. When there was rebellion in the Wisadek system, the guardian races sent by Metatron and sent by Giovanni were also overtaken, and their consciousness was entrapped. There are certain ways you can entrap a being in a body, and we'll get into this in a little bit. It has to do with creating an electrostatic body as opposed to an electrodynamic body. An electrodynamic body allows frequency to move freely through. An electrostatic body keeps it circulating, where it just circulates within itself and it blocks the currents. There were particular genetic experiments done and also planetary grid experiments and galactic grid experiments done in the Wisadek matrix that created a situation where about 89% of the energy of Giovanni Metatron was literally put into reversal. And when that happens, it creates like a black hole pulling on the Ascendant Master Collective itself. And there was a choice made by that matrix to either sever its connection completely to those of itself that it had lost. What this meant was it was going to fall. One way or another, it was going to fall. Because if you can't hold enough frequency to stay in resonance with the primal light and sound fields, with the primal sound fields especially, where the Ascendant Master levels are, that means you're coming into the matrix whether you want to or not. All right, if you lose a certain percentage as an Ascended Master, if you lose a certain percentage of your consciousness, because it's embodied in things that fall, they will pull you in. And the Metatron Giovanni Collective realized it was going to go in. It could have maintained itself at a D12 level and began its evolution from there. It would have had a big chore in its hands. It would have had to sever, first of all, its connection to its parts that were in the Wisadek matrix. And then it would have had to progressively accrete frequency until it could host out. It would have to host out, and it would become kind of like a baby Ascended Master Collective again, instead of a very old-time collective. The collective made a decision, and it was the collective, the Metatron collective of the Giovanni collective. They made a decision that they would do their fall in a certain way. They started to have, you can almost look at it as a virus. The parts of themselves that had fallen were still in communication electronically with the collective. Now, the ones that were in the matrix didn't know it, but every little thought that the fallen ones felt, its Ascendant Master Collective felt. And it began to take on the same attitudes. And one of the biggest and worst attitudes, and it's still a virus in this time matrix, is the attitude of blame. The Metatron entity, the Giovanni Metatron entity, decided to blame the other Ascendant Master Collectives for its fall. It was reminded that it agreed to do this. It was the one that was gung-ho, going to save the matrix, going to pull all itself out and all that. But it had enough of the influence of its fallen ones, that were 89% of its consciousness at this point, saying, it's somebody else's fault. It's your fault, so we're going to pay. That collective made a decision that it would use its knowledge of primal creation physics, and that it would take over the matrix, this matrix. That was originally what its fallen parts had wanted and what it had tried to stop its fallen parts from doing. And there was a little problem when this decision was made, because there was the Eye of Yahweh, the Metatron Eye, that was completely under the governance of the Metatronic entity of Giovanni. The Giovanni entity, through the collective of Metatron, turned control of that polarization refraction lens over to the Wisadek collectives. And they were able to use that to display it. It was already tapped into the phantom matrix on this time matrix. they were able to create by feeding energy off this time matrix and off phantom. They would pull energy from our time matrix, from the phantom matrix. They would use phantom matrix to pull it from here into their matrix. As long as they were able to feed off something else that had its life force connection to source, they wouldn't go into implosion. If the matrices were severed, they would go into implosion eventually. They'd get a few billion years of evolution out of it. But eventually they would be a deteriorating system. They would become extinct in terms of the race identity that they held. They would go back to source as units of consciousness. And that was unacceptable to them. Now, when the Metatron Collective made the decision to turn the Eye of Yahweh over to the Wisadek matrix, it had to be reprogrammed. The original program, mathematical scalar program of the Eye of Metatron, was compatible with this time matrix and with the phantom matrix and with source. It had the potentiality of regenerating into Christos. In order to do what they did by allowing the eye, creating the Eye of Metatron in a way, putting a program in that would allow it to actually reverse certain things so it could feed instead of just being a conduit that could take some energy, which was supposed to be the collectives getting hosted over, it would be able to open it both ways, send energy in and pull energy out. In other words, send energy in as a carrier wave to drag more energy out than it was supposed to. In order to do this, the programming on the Eye of Metatron had to be changed. It had to be changed from its original base 12, base 15 compatible, and I mean base 12, base 15, the D12 Christos pattern, but built on those 15 spheres that we talked about yesterday in, the basic structure, where you have a set of 7 and then another set of 7, and then that takes place within one. All right, so you have 15 spheres. The mathematics were altered in the Eye of Metatron lens to a base 7, where it was like taking the yolk out of an egg. So they would build their system, they would restructure their black hole system on the 7 pattern, which was literally cutting it off from the primal light and sound fields, but allowing it to plug into other systems on their lower heavens level that were built on the 7, because you have the 7 higher and lower heavens. So they took the lower heavens pattern, used it to reprogram and organize their black hole, and that allowed them to be able to tap into other lower heaven systems, other Veka systems. This created a distortion in the consciousness that was part of the Wisadek matrix. The Wisadek matrix people were doing bad enough as it was before they had Metatron get involved. They had certain successes as far as A.Arhayas was concerned. A.Arhayas was a planet that was, or a planetary system that was evolving close to where it could be brought back to its Christos imprint. But once the Eye of Metatron was used and run through the A.Arhayas stargates, it completely changed that. It completely redid the mathematical structure of their stargates so they couldn't plug in to a system, to a Christos system. So it not only posed a threat to our time matrix, but it totally, all the progress that had been made in healing the Wisadek system had been totally unplugged and undone. And the thing with the Metatronic system is it's permanent. Some things in physics can be undone. Some things reach critical mass, and if they reach a critical mass of distortion where there's less than 30% of their natural Christos template left, they become something else, and they're no longer compatible with their own template. That's what happened with the Wisadek matrix. The consciousness that was residing in that matrix and the planetary systems and the stargates in that matrix can't be plugged in again because of the choices that were made. And the main choice was made by the Metatron Giovanni entity, but it was made on behalf of many other collectives of the fallen ones that had petitioned to do, petitioned for them to do this. Please, you have control of the lens. Give us life, give us eternal life. That we're, we'll implode. All they had to do was agree to bioregenesis and agree to play fair. If they had entered the Emerald Covenant, they would have been able to evolve out. But it was known, and their scientists, their high-mind scientists knew that if they created this artificial mathematical structure, there was a way of bending light and sound that was based on the Vesica Pisces, 2 interwoven spheres. Now, the natural time matrix is based on a trivecca, not a bivecca. First there's a trivecca, and the bivecca is part of that. You would go single, bivecca, trivecca. That's a natural structure. What they did was simply use the eye of Metatron as their 0 point or their 1 point and build a double from there, a bivecca from there. They created artificial light through this particular synthesis of mathematics. They created totally polarized light through this process, because at least with the trivecca you have the 2 polarized points that are unified through the third. In their universe, everything is bipolar. It's like having a real bad chemical day, bipolar disorder. It's a whole universal system that's structured on bipolar disorder, which implies they have extremes of dramas. They have extreme highs and extreme lows, and they're constantly in that cycle. Now, the races that were in the Wissadek matrix at that time, they chose this. They wanted this, most of them, at least the creator gods, or they call themselves creator gods in that matrix, wanted it, because it would promise them one thing. As long as that eye of Metatron was their vampire energy-sucking device, they would have eternal life. They would be immortal. They would have the closest thing they could get to ascension without having to cooperate. They could have got regular ascension if they just, decided to be nice and didn't want to play Masters of the Universe. The Metatronic bodies that were created through the programming are very interesting structures. They take part of what would be a normal living biological structure, and they take out certain parts, the mathematics that are missing, or pieces of the template that are missing, and they plug in certain parts of the template together that weren't originally meant to be plugged in together. Completely destroys the entire template when it's fully done. There's not 30% left where you can do bioregenesis to plug it back into its natural divine blueprint. It creates an atrocity. It creates something other than what was originally created in the Christos vein, and it creates something that is not compatible with the mathematics or the scalar frequencies of the Christos divine blueprint for this matrix or any other one. So in making a choice to be immortal, they made a choice to be finite, because their immortality is dependent on sucking energy from living things, living matrices. That's why they will go out of their way, and that's why at this point, we'll get into the drama more tomorrow, because I want to get into the history. So I want, by tomorrow, when we start to talk about what this means to us and why we need to know it today, I want you to understand, the history of where this comes from. But there were races of consciousness created, both of draconian, because some of the draconian races that were in Phantom decided they wanted to play. That sounds good. Yeah, we can be immortal. Yeah, we can be immortal without having to cooperate with them. Yeah, then we can fight with you. There were a whole bunch of hybrid races created from the races of the fallen matrix. These began about 150 billion years ago. They started this connection with the Wissadek matrix. By 570 million years ago, it had become an absolute outrage, because 570 million years ago, the races and collectives that had agreed to go into the Metatronic pattern, and Metatron wasn't being prejudiced at that point, the more we can get the better, so they would let any of them. If the Odedicron wanted to come out of Phantom, they'd take them over there. If the Omicron wanted, they'd take them over there. What they didn't tell them is when they got on the other side, they'd become assimilated, which means their consciousness would be repatterned. They call it thought adjusting. There are some programs out there right now that teach you how to meet your thought adjuster. I'll talk about those tomorrow. But they would literally assimilate the consciousness of the being that came over into the electrostatic bodies that they had created themselves through the Metatronic imprint. They ate them, energetically speaking. It wasn't eating with big teeth and ripping flesh. It was transmuting the flesh through a certain type of Merkaba. And once the consciousness was in Merkaba, bringing it over and assimilating it through the reverse Merkaba fields that they had created through the Metatronic reversals. The Metatronic program that allowed for this artificially sustained dead living system were reversals of portions, where you took portions of the natural divine blueprint and pulled pieces out, pulled frequencies out. What was a base 12 was reduced to a base 8, which meant there are 8 sub-frequency bands in every dimension instead of 12, and there were only 11 dimensions instead of 12. This structure, through this structure, this program, and then they would take that structure and then they reverse the mathematical programming in it. That was the last step I wanted to explain there. So they take pieces out, make it a base 8, and reverse it. And then it would repel itself from the natural matrices. But it had the Metatronic eye, where it could siphon energy off other systems. The body forms created through this structure are pretty awesome. They're like astral bodies, like what we might consider our astral body or our ghost body. They would have the image of the being that originally went into the Wissadite matrix and adopted the Metatronic program. So let's say if you decided you wanted to go, you would be able to maintain yourself, but you'd be kind of like ghost-like. It would be an electrostatic body, a body that didn't evolve or grow or change. It always stayed that way, as long as you fed it. And what you would feed it by would be the frequencies of other living things. Now, 570 million years ago, after many races were created within the Wissadite matrix on the Metatronic program, they decided it was time to come and get what they wanted, which was the rest of us, which was the Phantom Matrix first. Because there was an interesting thing. The Phantom Matrix axis, if you look at our universal stargates as one Cathara grid, the Phantom Matrix axis came in at a 22.5 degree angle. It was running reverse, but it was a 22.5 degree shift from our vertical axis. The Wissadite matrix was on the other side, 22.5 degree shift. We were right in the middle. So they found a way to barrel through, to use wormhole technology, which is poking holes in the natural template to connect things that aren't supposed to be connected. That's like connecting the artery that runs through your neck to the one that runs through your heart to create a bypass that doesn't belong there. And eventually it collapses because it doesn't work really well, because it's not natural. They created something called the A.Arhayas wormhole. They used Aramatzus, which was their D11.5 star system planet that had almost made it into, return to Christic template, but fell. They created a wormhole between that through the moon of our, not our moon, but the moon of our D11 gate. Now our D11 gate was Avion. Its moon was called Avalon. They created the wormhole through Avalon and into Phantom, so it made an arc of open frequency. That began the building of something called the cube matrix. The cube matrix is the wonderful creation, the quite brilliant creation of divine science used with an anti-Christos intention. It is a, let's say, created life field. You could compare it to artificial intelligence, really. It's created without a soul because it's disconnected from what you would consider soul. It's disconnected from its connection to source, but it is able to sustain by science. The Metatronic lens is science. This is high science used for perversion. It wasn't originally. A Metatron originally was a good guy. But that changed, and when that changed, a whole new type of creation was brought into being that was never seen. It was literally a beginning point, which is hard to do when time is simultaneous. Wait a minute, what begins first? So obviously somewhere, the potentiality for it existed all along in the creations that Source created when it created the matrix itself. The mechanics that were set in motion with the original creation will come in and reset the balance, where the fields begin to separate The living field it's feeding off of will begin to pull away. The divine blueprint there will reset itself. And these are very long cosmic cycles when this resetting occurs. But there will always be a cosmic cycle of resetting of the divine blueprint. And that ensures that anything that became disharmonic, any black hole systems that were made, will be severed from the original matrix. That gets healed, and the other one has X amount of energy left, however much it managed to siphon, and it will have evolution until it expends its energy. And then it will implode upon itself, and it will become part of the particles, the particae, particae, and particum, that make up the dimensional fields. And what will happen then, once it's purged, is like a purification where it clears its own distortions by blowing itself apart. Those units of consciousness return to innocence, will then reassimilate into the original matrix from which they fell. But there will be no memory of the fall or of what they were. We're at a position right now where a cosmic cycle is coming to ending and a beginning. The Metatronic bodies are frightening things in a way, because the races that agreed to participate in order to have short-term immortality in exchange for eternal life, they sentenced themselves to that destiny, the path of A.Arhayas, that was originally intended as a path of evolution, a faster path of evolution back into Christendom, became the path of de-evolution. It became the path of the Metatronic imprint, which has no alternative but to return to source through implosion. Now, there are vast races there at this point, because the evolution has gone for so long. There are many, many races that originally started out as a handful of races of Draconian, Weesadek. Now, Weesadeks were the ones who originally weren't even part of this matrix. They had fallen from another collective and created that black hole system, that ours got hooked into. And the Anu Elohim. All of these races, there was just a small amount of them from the higher density fields, the higher dimensional fields, like D11, D10. Once they had made the Metatronic promise, and they had allowed their templates to be recoded, they created spawn. They created more of themselves. They, just like the creator gods, just like Source, created the Ascended Masters, and the Ascended Masters created the Rishi, and the Rishi created the Avatars and the Christos Founders races, and they created us down here. They decided, well, now we've got our own universe. We're masters of the universe now. Now we're God over here. And they began to create and populate their matrix with more and more races that had to feed off other living races in order to sustain their matrix. So at this point, there are many, many races there. And there's a reason in here why there's a lot of people that you can look at things that are Christic and anti-Christic, and you can understand them as part of a larger understanding that Source has, or you can go into blame, and you can call one bad, evil, and it should be destroyed. Or you can understand what it's about and where it fits, and you can perhaps feel for the destiny it chose for itself. So even though you can't allow it to harm you, you can still find love, no matter how horrific the things are that it might have done. The races of Phantom Matrix, once they became combined with the Weesadek Matrix, became a force of what, on this planet and many others, is known as the Antichrist. It is a collective, it's not just a singular. But imagine if you were a being. Now, imagine if you were a being that you didn't have a lot of memory of where you came from, because they don't give their own memory of where they came from. You were living in planetary systems. What if you found out that your only destiny was implosion, unless you tapped into other systems? What if you knew that Ascension was no longer even a possibility for you? That the only way you could go home and be healed to go back to where you came from was to do it in total innocence, like a child, with no knowing whatsoever, because you'd go back in pieces. there's a terror in that feeling, the terror of annihilation. That great, my parts might go back, but I'm not going to know it. You know? There's a feeling of being finite. And if you look around at the world we're in today, you can see the huge effect that these races have had once they begin to blend with the races here. Because most of our dogmas that we talked about earlier, the religious dogmas, even the science dogmas, are all coming from that place. They're all coming from a place where ascension really isn't an option. Survival of the fittest is one of the things that happens when a race realizes it's finite. And the only way it can sustain and not implode and not be blown back to space dust is to take energy from something else. It will. Unless it has enough D12, which it wouldn't be in that predicament if it did. If it had D12, it would realize, get it over with. Let me go back to space dust, because then I can get out of here. Then I can get free again. They can be free. It will be a long evolution for them, but they would go back into as the basic consciousness that forms the matrix they originally fell out of. And they would eventually be able to be renewed through new forms that would be created in that matrix. But they are living a reality where they're creator gods, and they have gods. There's a couple popular ones. One is called Jehovah. Another one is called A.Arhayas. Gives you an idea of some of the gods here. There's another one called Brahma. There's several. And these are like D11. They call them D11 dark avatars. They're avatar collectives. D11, 11.5 at the highest level of them. That 0.5 they get from plugging into the Metatronic eye. Now, the lens of the eye of Metatron was only the beginning of what became a nightmare. It's a nightmare we've all been living. And sometimes there is a temporary reprieve in the reality of ignorance is bliss. We've been living that little space since 9558 BC. Kind of like let's take a breather and pretend we don't know anything. Since the 570 million years ago, since the A.R.Hayas wormhole was created, a whole series of them were created to link through our gates into Phantom, to link the three together. There are also massive galactic wars, intergalactic wars, that were fought over this. There was a group of the original fallen ones in the Phantom Matrix that didn't want to go into the Weesadite Matrix. They didn't want to go into the Emerald Covenant either. So they were going to fight the Weesadeks. And they had members of their own that joined the Weesadeks. So it was splitting up of the races. There was a period of time called the Gaian-Orion Wars. And they took place 570 million years ago, right after the A.R.Hayas wormhole was created, when there were massive wars fought in the Gaia system, which from here is Polaris, which is Earth's density 3 counterpart, and in the Orion system, where we have Stargate 8 in Mintaka Orion. There's also something called Alnitak and Alnilam Orion, and all of those systems with their various inhabited races in Phantom Matrix and in here and in Weesadek began to fight. The guys here didn't fight. They were trying to defend, because what was happening were the Weesadeks were coming through and they were seizing control of various of the Stargates in Phantom. They attached Metatronic lenses to Stargate 8 in Phantom Matrix, and that was Alnitak. They attached it to Stargate 10 in Vega. They connected one of their planets to the part of Vega that had entered Phantom Matrix. They worked themselves down from 11. They had at 11.5. They had their Aramat planet. They connected that to the moon in D11, the Avalon moon in Phantom. They connected next, that was D11, 11.5. And they connected the 10 systems, and they put a Metatronic, they call them seed atoms. They put Metatronic seed atoms, which were a series of lenses, into D10 Phantom Vega. Now the Phantom the phantom templates were created, a lot of them during the original fall, when Stargate 12 had been imploded through blocking Stargate 11. It had sent a portion into the phantom imprint, which means reversal. It went into a reversed mathematical pattern, and they were all sustained by the Eye of Brahman that was put in. So, planetary system, dimensional system by dimensional system, the Weesadex managed to create wormhole links through using this particular mathematics and crystal technology that were referred to as the Metatronic seed atoms, putting them in the stargates between Phantom and here. They linked through the halls of Amente before the halls of Amente were there. In fact, the halls of Mente were created later because of this. They were the natural stargates in our system. They began to seed them with the Metatronic atoms, which meant there is a bridge, that arc. They have their own Ark of the Covenant, and it's not a holy covenant either. They created arcs of frequency that would run from Weesadeck Matrix through our stargates into Phantom. And eventually, what their ultimate goal was to do it all the way down from D11 all the way down to D1, link all the systems together, and then use the power to pull both of them into their matrix. So you could pull this time matrix down, literally break it off from its D12 connection at 11.5 at the Metatronic Eye, and reverse its whole mathematical coding, and reverse Phantom, and pull everything in them into the Metatronic imprint. That would be permanent if that were to happen. So of course the founders knew from the beginning that that was not going to be allowed to happen. There would be the sweep of the great cosmic cycle that would come through and open all of the highest gates and reset the D12 divine blueprint. What that would do would create a polarization wave that would separate anything that didn't belong in this divine blueprint originally and didn't have 30% of its original divine blueprint left because it had the Metatronic override, would be taken in to the Metatronic system. It wasn't a choice the founders made to cause harm to the ones in the Metatronic system. The Metatronic races blame the founders for this. They take no responsibility for the fact that they're the ones that created this darn blasphemy of science themselves. They sealed their own destiny when they created the Metatronic distortion. And at this point, they are simply trying to feed on whatever's available. They've done an amazing thing. When I show you this one graph, it'll give you an idea of just the brilliance, the intelligence level. You can be really intelligent and really stupid at the same time. But the sophistication of intelligence or intellect that these beings have to be able to take science. They're not just moving bodies around, they're moving galaxies around. They're moving suns. They're connecting suns to suns to suns through stargates. When you think about the level of intelligence that it takes to do that, and the level of knowledge it takes to do that, and then you think about us here, right now, it's almost laughable on the cosmic game. But there's an innocence about us, our race. That's what's going to get us through. But this is where it can almost get scary if we didn't know better. Now, if we know our direct connection, we know we have our D12 frequency available now, and if we amplify that in our fields, we get those Merkabahs built, we're going to be okay. We don't have to be afraid. But boy, is this one of those underdog games. You see those dramas with the underdog, the little guy, the David and Goliath. Well, right now, we're dealing with self-appointed creator gods from a fallen matrix that have painstakingly, over a very long period of the illusion of linear time, created a technology. We'll get more fully into the technology tomorrow. It's known as the Beast.
Jo, Das mal zu diesem Video. Ähm, Man
I
kann
want to make
sich
sure there's plenty of.
ich habe nicht gesagt, du sollst hier sprechen. Ich habe hier noch ein Video gefunden. Das geht nicht lange. Warte mal, wo habe ich das? Ah, hier. Ja. Ist vielleicht auch nicht so uninteressant. Er redet da auch vom Metatron. Habe ich jetzt noch nicht gesehen, aber wisst ihr was? Einfach mal laufen lassen, weil ich denke, wenn man mal so ein bisschen sucht mit einem Begriff und dann sucht man sich einfach mal ein bisschen durchs Internet, dafür haben wir es ja zur Verfügung, und schaut sich einfach mal verschiedene Aspekte hier an. Und das ist das, was ich immer gerne sage. Man pickt sich die Sachen raus, die für einen selber hier wichtig erscheinen. Das andere, was nebensächlich ist, das lässt man erstmal außen vor und arbeitet mit dem immer so ein Stückchen weiter und schaut sich halt mal unterschiedliche Perspektiven an. Ich meine, jeder wird da seine eigene Perspektive haben. Man sagt ja auch, wir leben jeder für sich irgendwie auf einer Insel und man versucht dann seinen Horizont zu erweitern. Manche wollen es nicht, aber ich denke, die Masse mittlerweile möchte das. Und da muss man halt auch diese Indoktrination, die man über die Jahre hin bekommen hat, wie das vorhin so schön die Lotti geschrieben hatte, muss man halt ablegen. Und erstmal mit einem Open Mind sich alles anschauen. Und dann fängt man auch langsam an, Verbindungen aufzubauen. Dann hört man sich dieses an, jenes an, man wird überschlagen von Themen. Das ist egal. Jede Information sich einfach erstmal zu sich nehmen, aufnehmen, wie beim Essen auch. Und ja, das, was halt sehr gut schmeckt, das pickt man sich zuerst raus. Das, was weniger gut schmeckt, aber zum Essen dazugehört, das wird dann auch mitgegessen. Und ja, aber dann entdeckt man hier und da doch vielleicht eine Verbindung. Und so ist das Prinzip ja hier auch. So mache ich es auch immer wieder gerne. Schaue mir wirklich so viele Medien wie möglich an. Und dann bildet sich irgendwann ein Bild. Und dann weiß man auch, in welche Richtung man weitergeht. Und da ist es egal, ob was ja hier immer wieder reinkommt, ich weiß, das ist Thema Nummer 1. Flache Erde, runde Erde, Kugelerde und so weiter. Hier geht es aber um den Kern, meine Meinung. Hier geht es immer um den Kern der Sache und versuchen, die Wahrheit herauszufinden. Ich sag mal in erster Linie für sich selber. Ich tue jetzt hier nicht sagen, das ist die Wahrheit und ich zeige euch das so und das muss so sein. Nein, das mache ich nicht. Ist auch nicht im Sinne unseres Kanals, das wisst ihr. Deswegen reden wir immer von Hypothesen oder auch Theorien, wie auch immer. Mir ist auch, oder uns ist sehr wichtig, dass für den einen oder für den anderen wirklich immer was Interessantes dabei ist, wo man sich dann rauspicken kann. So, wie gesagt, das Video habe ich hier noch nicht gesehen. Da geht es auch um einen Metatron. Also da scheint ja wirklich die Verbindung mit der Matrix zu sein. Und weil vorhin das mit diesen, lass ich nur im Chat gucken, sind wir auch alle hier schön miteinander verbunden, weil hier mehr verbunden sind. Komm, lasst mal den Chat hier auch mal ein bisschen krachen. Seid so ruhig immer. Biwecker, Triwecker, schreibt Fisch gefischt. Ich denke mal, das eine, diese Triwecker symbolisierte die Trinity, die Dreifaltigkeit. Das andere ist ja, da fehlt ja etwas. Ich suche das hier nochmal. Ich meine, hier irgendwo war das. Vielleicht erinnert sich noch jemand ungefähr, wo das war. Hier. Das hier symbolisiert ja die Dreifaltigkeit. Körper, Geist und Seele. Und hier ist meiner Meinung nach, ihr könnt mich eines Besseren belehren oder ihr eure Meinung dazu schreiben, Körper und Geist. Mal so als Beispiel. Wir wissen ja, dass zum Beispiel die Klontechnik ja gang und gäbe ist. Ne? Also sollten einige, denke ich, aufgeklärt sein. Ansonsten so Stichwort Cloning. Es gibt genug Filme, die das zeigen, dass es eigentlich gang und gäbe ist. Für uns nicht, aber für die gewisse Gesellschaft ist es Standard. Und da geht es eigentlich darum, dass eigentlich nie eine Seele vorhanden ist. Es ist nur ein Bewusstsein, eine Übertragung hat stattgefunden. So mit dem, das kannst du ja auch noch programmieren und manipulieren, wie du es brauchst. Und dann läuft dieser Avatar mit einem programmierten Bewusstsein rum. Mit den Erinnerungen des Originals. Ja, aber da ist keine Seele. Und ich denke, das ist auch hier so der Punkt. Okay, Matrix-Symbolik ist auch ganz gut. Woran diese, wie sie auch sagt, diese Rassen ja ein Problem ja wohl damit haben. Unter anderem, ja. Und Matrix an sich, und das ist mir für mich mittlerweile sehr bewusst geworden. Wir leben hier in einer, ich sage mal, Simulation. Wir haben hier einen Avatar bekommen. Wir sind hier hineingeboren in die Matrix. Haben natürlich unsere Seele dabei, aber das ist nur ein Teil der Seele. Wo ist der andere Teil? Und da gibt es schon verschiedene Videos, die diese Aspekte aufgenommen haben. Vielleicht werde ich das beim nächsten Mal mal einfach zeigen. Und da kann sich jeder mal ein Bild darüber machen. Wäre interessant, das sich mal anzuschauen. Und da gibt es sehr, sehr viele, die diese Thematiken ja auch aufgreifen. The Cube, und ich sage jetzt mal in Verbindung mit der flachen Erde, wie gestern auch gezeigt, das Auge. Überall sehen wir ja das Auge, und das Auge wurde ja gestern mal gut auseinandergenommen in Verbindung mit der Bibel, was die Bibel uns beschreibt. Die beschreibt den Körper, die Anatomie nach seiner Perspektive, der das Video gemacht hat. Und das fand ich sehr, sehr interessant. Ja, und wie gesagt, das Auge, die Linse, die Iris, und was ist in der Mitte? Was ist in der Mitte vom Auge? Oder ist das Loch, das schwarze Loch? Und das könnte eigentlich die Verbindung sein. Na? Ich habe das Video... Habe ich das von gestern jetzt hier irgendwo? Nee. Auf jeden Fall mal so ein paar Gedankengänge, Ideen von mir. Ja, danke. Wenn es wirklich, wie gesagt, gestern, das war wirklich sehr interessant. Lass mich mal überlegen. Pass mal auf, ich suche das nochmal raus, das Video, da kann ich ja nachher nochmal kurz rein. Das hier geht 15 Minuten, die Zeit werde ich gerade so brauchen. Ich würde zwar gerne das Video mitschauen, aber wisst ihr was? Ich würde einfach mal sagen, wir lassen das hier mal laufen. Ich denke, da ist bestimmt was Interessantes dabei. Mein Gefühl sagt das. Und dann können wir ja nochmal im Chat drüber schreiben. Okay?
We have been exploring Metatron's cube, this temporary encasement which has been binding consciousness to geometric configurations designed to hold a soul within its false matrix. Blanketed with such a dense overlay, Earth and all of humanity has spun on the cycle of birth and death in order to maintain a consistent energy supply for the entities who maintain this system. The 0 point has been put on lockdown through a complex system of toroidal compression fields held together through the Merkaba hex and chakra kundalini implants. It's then no wonder that Metatron is an anagram for torment, because it's through Metatron's cube that we find ourselves in and around physical substance that ebbs and flows. In my last video, we talked about the vesica piscis. This is the biwave distortion brought into this reality through the Metatronic fields that gradually came up with a system of extreme polarity, inserting that code into the consciousness which the Metatronic system ensnared. Therefore, the original architecture of reality of the true Earth, which was once less dense and full of incredible life, became reversed and locked into a self-consuming field of distortion. This fall of man, this implementation of the overlay, is synonymous with the tales of ancient genetic engineering. In this altered state of turmoil, our fear gave the Metatronic system the consent to use that fear to create frequency fences. Our energy was broadcasted to create a net and produced a predator mind construct intended for mass human parasitism. Confusion circulated. These artificial nets and constructs were further designed to progressively pull the Earth and everything within it into further inorganic entrapments. The moon appeared in the sky and began to reinforce this grid. Cycles began, and any remaining DNA of Earth that was silica-based mutated rapidly into carbon. After all, nothing can remain eternal under the moon. Carbon comes from the Latin carbo, meaning coal or charcoal, because it burns easily. It's fallible. And the same way we can put charcoal in our fires to warm us up, the various entities who uphold the energy extraction matrix use our carbon suits as a means to warm themselves up. A cycle is a perpetual circulating period of time, on the completion of which certain phenomena return in the same order. Cycles are loops. They are not natural. They hold this realm and everything in it hostage to time, which is a creation of the Metatronic overlay. I described in my video on the chakra overlays how our endocrine system is a part of this matrix, that our internal organs and glands bind us to restraint through necessity. After the genetic altering of our avatars, humans found themselves now requiring food to eat, water to drink, air to breathe. It was compulsory now to maintain our bodies through focusing on density. One might hear all of this and ask the question, if we were once in a more paradisal state, free from cyclical time, how could such a hijacking of our nature occur? The simple answer is, it had never been done before. We did not know what a lie was. We did not know what deception looked or felt like. In the quintessential tale of the fall, Adam and Eve were deceived for the first time by the serpent. Before this, they did not know good and evil. Dualism was not in the collective repertoire. The virus upheld a type of binary, rigid, domineering consciousness that had not yet been experienced, so we couldn't identify it as a threat. before it was too late. After the inversion, the original world collapsed. More genetic experimentation was performed to further fragment humanity, aiming to distance us from tapping into our true creative potential. The brain was divided into two hemispheres. Artificial electromagnetic energy waves we know as ley lines were set up on the Earth, reinforced through pyramids, churches, and monolith structures. And in time, we submitted ourselves to the master-slave paradigm through genocide and various means of deception to further lull us into a state of forgetfulness and thus submission. We have been severed into 7 levels of perception. This is the security system of the Metatronic overlay. 7 layers of the aura, 7 chakras, 7 glands of the endocrine system, 7 states of matter, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 notes of the musical scale, and 7 planets. What we call planets are nets. They are the plan to net us all in this overlay. There are 7 reinforcers to this overlay system above us, which energetically keep everything moving in cycles and according to fate, which really means fatality. This system is held by Saturn, also known as Satan or Father Time. This is the lord of the Metatronic system. This is why Saturn is at the top of the ancient depictions of these spheres of influence. An urn is a vase that holds cremated ashes. The name is revealing to us Saturn sits on the urn of the overlay, acting as the lord of discipline and karma. Discipline and karma. Why would we require discipline and resolution of karma? What did we do to deserve such discipline? And who is penalizing us? After realizing this situation for what it is, how can any force deem humans as the wrongdoers who need to correct their ways? Well, karma and discipline are the patriarchal orders of the caretakers of the energy extraction matrix. Humans have been told that birth and death are necessary in order to work out issues and become perfected. But if samsara itself was introduced after the parasite's invasion, then what are we working out? Nothing. The karma soul recycling system has been a farce, a false-like trap designed to maintain the Metatronic overlay. We call this system the Saturn Moon Matrix because it begins with the moon and ends with Saturn. The phrase carbon copies is not just a saying, it's revealing to us why there are organic portals. The Metatronic overlay is all about getting the living souls to identify with illusion. It's about creating an atmosphere that is convincing enough so we give our consent to it. But in order to create the illusion that money is legitimate, that hedonism is for our benefit, that nothing is wrong with reality, that humans are inherently flawed, there must be shadow beings, non-player characters representing themselves as true humans. The majority of the population are nothing more than shadow reflections of the living souls, whose essence has been replicated through the cycle of samsara. It's commonly asserted that everybody has a doppelganger. The word doppelganger is German for ghostly spirit or double walker. This isn't just a fun idea. All around us are carbon copies of the living souls, acting out the charade of the overlay. When we have been taken through the false light trap of the moon, our essence has been cloned. Upon each return to Earth, there has been more and more carbon copies of the living souls until we get a situation like we have now, in which the majority of the population are nothing more than AI perversions of the true essence. This explains why, in this process of waking up, many seem to be in La La Land, happily absorbed in deception. It's because organic portals or soulless beings operate on a binary consciousness. They attach, react to the system because they are a part of the system. Here's a paradox to swallow. There are absolutely entities that have constructed and upheld the energy extraction matrix through convincing us to invert the frequency of truth by over-identifying with rigid consciousness and a reality based in master-slave mentalities. But at the end of this game, it will be revealed that those who were parasiting were nothing more than manifested aspects of a fallen consciousness designed to reflect to us the nature of dualism and what outcomes such a paradigm reveals. This is a paradox, but this is the nature of consciousness. Regardless of our choices, what we experience always reflects to us our deficits, our strengths, and our judgments. We cannot escape ourselves because everything around us is ultimately the universal dreamer playing itself out in an elaborate show. The separation consciousness that is played out is not in vain. What may have begun as an invasion of Earth shall end in Earth's rebirth. You see how that works? Whatever is thrown at us ultimately is able to be transmuted. The transformation we're about to witness will be the most heroic story ever told. How will it end? That is a mystery. The surprise will result in the biggest liberation the multiverse has ever seen. I want to mention that truth is a frequency, not an idea or mental epitome. These videos are designed to empower you with a truth far beyond ideology, beliefs, or left brain reasoning. These videos are not designed to be right. They're here to instill you with the frequency of truth. So, take what you resonate with and leave what you don't. Take care, everyone.
Ja. Was sagt ihr dazu? Interessant oder nicht? Eine Stille im Chat. Ich find's genial. Ja, also wie gesagt, mit solchen Themen beschäftige ich mich sehr, sehr gerne. Ich habe auch da ein sehr kontroverses Video heute gesehen. Ähm, Gib mir mal eine Sekunde. Ja, was er hier auch gezeigt hat, ich habe hier noch ein Video von ihm, das ist genauso mega. Das habe ich nicht übersetzt, aber es beschreibt, ich wollte es übersetzen für euch. Es sind ja nur 23 Minuten zu übersetzen. Vielleicht werde ich das noch tun, wenn ihr Interesse dran habt. Ich zeige es euch jetzt im Englischen. Er hat eine super Stimme, mir gefällt das. Also das Englisch hier kann man sich wirklich anziehen. Reinziehen, nicht anziehen, reinziehen. Weil er wirklich sehr, sehr tief in diese Geschichte reingeht mit der flache Erde Modell und ja, er beschreibt auch, was zum Beispiel dieses Torusfeld bedeutet, diese grüne Aurora Borealis, so wie sie sich das nennt, hat ja eine bestimmte Funktion. Und wie gesagt, ich habe vorhin, also bevor ich hier Livestream gemacht habe, habe ich ein Video gesehen. Warte mal kurz, ich muss mal schauen, wie ich da hinkomme. Na, ich werde es vielleicht machen. Wollt ihr das Video auch sehen, was ich jetzt gefunden habe von ihm? Das ist wirklich mega. Ähm, also wenn ihr Lust habt. Wenn ihr keine Lust habt, dann verschiebe ich das auf einen anderen Mal. Wer hat Lust, wer hat keine Lust? Aber ich denke, ihr habt alle Lust. Weil wie gesagt, heute ist Cinema-Tag. Heute schauen wir uns wirklich mal so ein paar Videos an. Reden mal ein bisschen. Im Chat ist dann immer ruhig, wenn der Film läuft. Das verstehe ich. Aber ich denke, hier sind wirklich interessante Sachen für euch dabei. Weil das wirklich wichtig ist. Mit dem Cube. Beschäftigt euch mit dem Cube. Es wird immer davon gesprochen, die Matrix zu verlassen, aber man kann sie nur verlassen, wenn man das versteht. Und das habe ich gestern schon erwähnt, es ist mir sehr, sehr wichtig und die Zeit ist einfach rum. Es ist keine Zeit mehr da. Die Zeit ist relativ, ich weiß, wir leben im Jetzt, aber ich persönlich habe keine Lust mehr, mir hier das immer wieder neu zu erleben müssen. Deswegen beschäftige ich mich mit dem Cube. Das ist der Schlüssel. Okay? Ich suche noch währenddessen hier, der geht jetzt circa 23 Minuten. Warte mal, ich lasse das Fenster mal auf. Ich tue euch das später dann nochmal verlinken. Dum, 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 dum. Pause, Ton an. Für euch natürlich in Untertitel. Also ich bin dazu, ich muss wirklich gestehen, ich bin begeistert, dass ihr oder viele trotzdem dabei sind, auch wenn es Englisch ist im Haupttitel. Mir ist es aber auch wichtig zu erwähnen, also unser Kanal hat ja wirklich internationales Publikum auch dabei. Also wirklich, wir haben Amerika, wir haben Rumänien, Serbien, Japan, unglaublich viele ausländische, sag ich mal, also außerhalb von Deutschland, also Menschen dabei, die hier unseren Kanal mitbegleiten und wir bekommen auch Feedback von denen. Ich bin froh drum, ja, dass ich sowas auch im Englischen zeigen kann. Man gewöhnt sich ja dran. So, mal gucken, ob wir alle verbunden sind hier. Ich schau mal kurz jetzt hier live im Chat auf dem anderen Monitor. Ob das möglich ist, dass alle in einem Rutsch. Ich suche, wie gesagt, jetzt ein interessantes Video raus. Das ist für mich sehr kontrovers. Da geht es auch über dieses Blood over Intent. Blut über die Absicht nennt sich das auf Deutsch. Sag jetzt dazu, das geht auch gerade sehr stark. Ich schätze mal 2, 3 Jahre, vielleicht schon zu spät, aber es ist nie zu spät, sich mit diesem Thema mal eventuell auseinanderzusetzen. Plot over Intent könnt ihr gerne mal in YouTube euch auf die Suche machen. Ich wäre jetzt damit extrem vorsichtig, ja, was das Thema betrifft. Ich sage jetzt nicht für und ich auch sage auch nichts dagegen. Man muss sich wirklich damit beschäftigen. Und da ist der Cube auch dementsprechend interessant und sollte man sich wirklich erstmal damit beschäftigen und dann sich mit dem Rest. Ich bin ja auch mit meinem Team dabei, ein Video zu machen über Menstruationsblut. Da werden vielleicht einige Frauen jetzt hellhörig, weil wir haben ja auch Frauen hier unter uns. Was ich für interessant halte, wie gesagt, da sind wir noch am Vorbereiten, also ist eigentlich so gut wie fertig. Dann geht es ums Video produzieren. Da bräuchten wir noch ein bisschen Zeit. Ähm, aber Menstruationsblut oder das Thema Blut an sich ist sehr, sehr, sehr umfangreich. Und da möchten wir auch gerne solche Themen mal ansprechen. Ja, ich stelle euch den Telegram-Kanal gerne rein. Und zwar ist unser Hauptkanal der hier. Passt mal auf im Chat. Das ist der Hauptkanal. Da posten wir sozusagen Bildmaterial und so weiter. Im Moment ist es ein bisschen ruhig. Wir haben, wie gesagt, viel zu tun. Und dann schicke ich euch noch den Chat-Kanal von uns. Halt, sage ich natürlich das Falsche hier. Das sollte der hier sein. Gib mir mal eine Sekunde, bitte. Und zwar hier, das ist unser Hauptkanal. Seht ihr das? Ach so, ja, wir haben ja Verzögerung. Ja, das ist der Hauptkanal, Tartaria. Da seht ihr, das sind. Ich verlinke auch hier immer die Livestreams. Und hier sind auch diverse Beiträge dabei, auch von euch. Werden wir hier Sachen reinposten. Wenn ihr also Fundstücke habt und so weiter, könnt ihr das den Admins schicken. Die sind ja zu finden in der Mitgliederliste. Warte mal. Dann haben wir noch den Kanal Smalltalk. Also wir haben 3 Kanäle. Den Hauptkanal ist Tartaria YouTube, den Kanal Smalltalk. Ihr könnt auch direkt suchen in Telegram. Da reden wir allgemein über bestimmte Themen. Und in unserem Special-Kanal hier, dort versuchen wir jetzt seit neuestem immer Wochenthemen einzubauen. Das heißt, es wird sich nur über ein Thema unterhalten. Geht einfach in die Suche, Tartaria Special, das hier müsste der Link sein übrigens. Dort könnt ihr auch diskutieren. Ich sage jetzt dazu, hier wird nichts Politisches gepostet. Hier geht es wirklich rein um diesen Umfang von Tartaria. Beinhaltet ja vieles, aber aktuelle Politik und so Geschichten werden in diesem Kanal hier nicht bearbeitet. So als Info vorab. Ansonsten, wenn Fragen sind oder so, Medien posten wird auch nicht funktionieren. Hat alles seine verschiedenen Gründe. Es steht alles in den Gruppenregeln. Das hat nichts mit Zensur zu tun. Das hat einfach was mit dem aktuellen Geschehen zu tun, um uns da ein bisschen zu schützen und euch zu schützen. So, das mal nebenbei. Die Links sind wie gesagt auch in dem YouTube-Kanalprofil. Ist es dann auch nochmal verlinkt. Dann möchte ich euch noch gerne nochmal den Vedonella-Kanal, den haben wir auch verlinkt bei uns. Das ist so ein YouTube-Kanal, wo wirklich so mit wunderschönen Videos und ein super Sprecher, der Vedun, geniale Stimme, mir gefällt seine Stimme sehr gut, hat jetzt sich zur Aufgabe gemacht, so schöne Videos mit Kurzgeschichten, Poesie zu bringen. Geht immer rein, Vedonella-Kanal, der ist echt super toll. Mir gefällt es sehr gut, ich bin da auch immer dabei und ich bin begeistert. So, noch irgendwelche Fragen hier kurz? Hamburg ist on board, das freut mich. Bayern ist dabei. We have International. Gut, lasst uns mal weitermachen. Ich guck mal, ob ich das eine Video noch finde. Das wird nicht so lang gehen. Ich suche eine ganz, ganz kurze Version raus von dem einen. Aber ich möchte euch gerne hier dieses Video euch zeigen. Das ist wirklich interessant. Habe ich das auf Deutsch gestellt übrigens? Ja, habe ich auf Deutsch gestellt. Ich bin jetzt mal wieder ruhig, ich habe wieder so viel geredet. Und los geht's.
In Shadow, A Modern Odyssey is an animated short film by Lubomir Arsov. It appeared on YouTube in late 2017 and remains one of the greatest representations of this shadow world we've found ourselves in. This film is an almost perfect representation of the process we have been going through. We have plugged into the earthly simulation of consciousness to observe the shadows of our innermost projected on the outside to rise into the light. This is the message of In Shadow. Let me explain. A central theme to the film is the cube, used as a symbol for a containment field. Of what's called the Platonic solids, Plato assigned the cube to represent Earth. He wrote, "To Earth, then, let us assign the cubic form, for Earth is the most plastic of all bodies." It is because the Earth as we know it has been a charade, has been a reflection of cubed consciousness. This is why the cube has been a pervasive symbol. It reflects to us our own cubed consciousness, as seen by the many black cubes scattered across the world, most notably the one in Mecca, the one in Judaism used within the tefillin, and there are many, many movies which utilize the cube as a plot device. Plato and the ancient Gnostics thought the world was a counterfeit created by an ignorant and flawed god known as the Demiurge. The narrative goes, the Demiurge trapped our spirits in this false reality, and it was up to us to free ourselves from it. This material world is Maya, illusion. But this illusion hasn't been the result of an external deity inflicting imprisonment. The Demiurge represents the collective shadow, the unresolved aspects of the living souls, which manifested as a matrix. Consciousness can only ever be directed through one's inner and energetic consent. The point of our world of cubed consciousness has been to reflect the rigid, binary, and fragmented ways of ourselves that we must shed if we are to fully realize unity and just be. That's why broken apart, the word cube says C-U-B. When we can just be in ourselves with the gifts that lie behind the self-imposed illusion, we break out of the cube. We begin in shadow by zooming into a cubed Earth. We find a central pillar within a megacity, appearing as the source of cubed energy. Cloaked figures are worshipping the cube. This is the worship of all things left-brained and bureaucratic, leaving out the nourishing breath of nurture, the true feminine. And the coming scenes depict exactly what type of inner and outer environment this creates. The cube flies by a crowd of beings. The first man it flies to has a hole in his heart. Images are shown of people in a state of bondage and equally of compliance, stacked on top of each other as they perform their mindless work tasks. These are the faces of repression. Materialism is highlighted as a mind prison, we are shown beings clinging in a state of hypnotism to a car, a house, to phones, to their jobs, as their heads break away what looks like black glass. The time keeps turning on loop as people engage in a work lifestyle that requires full inversion, hence the upside-down people. It's required to tear out one's own heart to sustain such inversion. We are revealed a creepy mask imposed on TV characters. This mask signifies the persona that many have felt they must wear during this purgatorial process. One of the Jungian archetypes, the persona, enables an individual to interrelate with their surrounding environment by reflecting a role that the individual is playing. But the persona is a mask which hides the true feelings, perspectives, and depth of an individual. Before we go any further, remember, this film is displaying to us the environment we've been in. The word environment is like environmente. Viron refers to a virus, and mente, in Latin, means mind. We've been observing an inner mind virus, and that is the only reason our outer world has projected such inversion. However, the ending of this film reveals that ascension, transcendence, is the reason for this suffering. Masks are seen on party-goers drinking and on lovers in bed. A zoom in reveals that these lovers are akin to babies in the womb. We have been in the womb of the Matrix. This is why the word matrix comes from the French word for womb. The baby is hovering in a spirit realm and then snaps into the cubed reality where it is injected with vaccines. Scenes of students are shown alongside the energetic parasitism which a cubed consciousness sustains. Drugs, war, militarization, money, and death are emphasized as all being manifestations of the same parasitic force. The leaders and news anchors seen on the world stage are merely puppets with strings and are being fed their lines by dark entities, connecting them all to a hive mind portrayed by the black tubes running into the news anchors' heads. This is the hive mind of deceit, hence the persona mask reappears. Notice that these dark entities are shadows. This leads us to my very message, that what we have branded as dark has simply been an externalization of the collective shadow. Without consenting to illusion, these dark entities actually don't exist. They are akin to figments in a dream. All that glitters is not gold in this matrix. Sparkles give way to scenes of celebrities showing off their false perfection, and of entertainment, which reinforces this false perfection through illusory archetypes. An illusory archetype is an example of a certain person or way of being that is based upon self-trickery. Most archetypes we have witnessed around us have aimed to promote inauthenticity and external displays of dominance, or of personality quirks that stem from a disconnection to spirit. Humans are shown in mindless engagement on their smartphones, further promoting these illusory archetypes or personas. Children play video games, promoting bloodshed. Vanity is highlighted in the next scenes, with selfie taking and shopping bags. Behind these scenes are oil rigs and subsequently fire. This reveals the all-consuming nature of vanity, which extracts more than it gives. Vanity is a fire that eats us alive while promoting a great external image. This is strengthened with models who are flashed with obese forms. One extreme of consciousness leads to another extreme. this is duality. We have seen toxic forms of the masculine and feminine all around us, hence this next scene. The masculine and feminine, joined together in divine harmony, sustains abundance because the two are meant to merge in unification and therefore uphold their divine aspects. These are energies that reside in us. The divine feminine rules nurture, empathy, compassion, and receptivity, while the sacred masculine rules order, courage, strength, and boundary setting. The whole point of this process is to pair together these inner aspects and thus be revealed the great mystery of Amor, of eternal love. This is shown at the end of this film, but let's continue. We are taken through more imagery of broken individuals who sustain and even promote personas, all enslaved to their own consent. We see enslaved animals used for body parts to feed an animalistic population, and next, the genetic modification of our produce. Following is a scene portraying sickness as an endless hall with cheap hospital beds. This is what illusion does. It makes us ill. And a population seeped in this illusion gravitates towards the chemical drugs and potions that are offered by the pharmaceutical industry as directed by scientism. The next scenes display the stale fruits of scientism, which is the notion that science has exclusive access to the truth, disregarding anything unseen or felt. Scientism categorizes life as a series of cold physical processes that has no inherent purpose and no wisdom. And we've all seen scientism play out. Even as the world has appeared to be getting sicker and sicker, the scientists are still upheld as the honorable masterminds of society and change. The system that is manifested, again, laces together ailments like drugs, money, and war. The natural world is depicted as being in conflict with the insatiable desires of the shadow-ruling forces, which wish to bind everything in its cubed paradigm. This is all about death culture, a culture which promotes death and scarcity, not life and abundance. Those who oppose this culture are seen transforming into prisoners. Let me make a note here. Opposition is not how we solve this situation. As cruel as this world may currently appear, nothing is as it truly seems. We must look behind the veil to discover the energetics at play. Opposition maintains that there is an enemy that must be smited in order for us to liberate ourselves. And while that may seem to be the case, it is truly the inner journey which ultimately propels us into a state of resolution. Starve the inner parasite, starve the outer parasite. This may be difficult to understand for those who have felt in bondage to the ill workings of the outer, but remember, you are a microcosm of the macrocosm. If you do not consent to opposition, then parasitism cannot wrap you up in an energy extraction game. Thus, the parasitism eats itself alive, and this is shown pretty soon in this film. The next scenes depict corrupt deals being made to uphold slavery, specifically in African and indigenous populations, where illusory archetypes have been most imposed. A black man and white man are seen choking each other. This represents duality, going against an opposing force, which is really the same thing as you, leading to suffering. But everybody remains silent because that has been the way of things. We ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that signified our exit from paradise. You see what I'm saying? Eradicate duality, eradicate this construct. This duality is shown in the political sphere, where two sides pretend to argue as a tactic to keep those consenting to such illusion in bondage. It seems as if our leaders have been having a glorious time, whining and dining and socializing, and even giving into their perverse ways. Once again, the cubed ways of the world are emphasized. The next scene is a turning point. We see beings breaking down even more. Their bones are showing. The parasitism has been eating themselves from the inside out and the outside in. And those who were initially worshipping the cube have become cubed themselves, twisted and deformed, slaves to their own parasitism. This is the nature of parasitism. It cannot sustain itself and therefore crumbles during these end times. The beings shown are they themselves sick, hiding in a sphere of masks, nervously guarded by their military-industrial complex. Thus begins the breakdown of this consciousness. The so-called security of this matrix comes crashing down, shown by a thin house and a car falling over. Everything becomes engulfed in a sort of vortex wind as the masks fall apart and the entire illusion crashes on itself. No longer can inauthenticity reign supreme. This is what we've been waiting for. A scene shows a man's red cube breaking. The cube has served its purpose. Everything was all along just a reflection of aspects of the collective mind playing out in 3D to destroy itself. What a genius divine plan. This breakage and disillusion causes panic to all who have ignored themselves and thus the divine. As we've said many times, there are a finite number of game players here. The soulless beings of the Matrix are the masses. They are not waking up because they cannot wake up. These non-player characters are products of a secondary oversoul that developed due to our consciousness inverting through projecting the inner unconscious and subconscious outwardly instead of incorporating. So, they are pieces of the collective human genetic memory that did not come from spirit into matter, but developed in matter through inverted spirit. Therefore, it's not a judgment, it is an immovable reality to say that most beings here don't have the capacity to break free from time and into the original design because they were never a part of the original design. Back to In Shadow. Everything is crumbling. A leader's suit breaks apart off him, exposing his vulnerable self. A banker is shown dead on the ground, stuffed with his own greed. Meanwhile, a masculine and feminine figure are withstanding this destruction. They are rising up towards a beckoning light. A burst of fire pours into the city, shattering the material. It is time for matter to merge with spirit. And any limitation, any contraction is expunged by expansion. The masculine is faced with the eyes of a dragon and faces this dragon through activating the heart, the 0 point. He is a living soul. This heart activation guides him upwards and above the soulless beings who remain trapped in the air. His material shell breaks off, revealing a light body. This is the light body activation of Ascension. The majestic, divine feminine rises up to unify with the sacred masculine, and together they stand, sword in hand. Through this struggle, they have bridged together matter and spirit, earth and the heavens. Behind them is the tree of life. They have returned to the center, the tree of life being a symbol of the North Polar paradise, which all of our hearts are connected to. Disturbed faces are seen in a toroidal motion, funneling into the center point, the heart space. This is exactly what we've been saying on this channel, that the above and below are manifestations of an allocated heart essence, and at the end of this purgatorial experience, all energy that sustained parasitism shall be reincorporated into the heart, giving way to a new birth. This is why a baby is formed through this merging, representing the start of a new age, a golden age of expansion, the rebirth of Christ consciousness. This video ends with eyes opening. Now our eyes are opened. This film displays what happens when we fall into a state of amnesia as to who we truly are. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is a quote by Carl Jung. It has much relevance to what we've been going through. In the Xbox Series X trailer, we are shown a black cube with a central emerald light glowing at the top. This references the emerald heart space, and thus the aurora at the center. The trailer involves an expanding golden halo after a burst of singularity. This golden light encodes the world, and we see video game images within the black cube. This is revealing that our world has been but a series of encoded messages and reflections from the all-nourishing light of the 0 point to return us back to the golden halo. Shadows shall transmute into halos. At the beginning of this film, we are shown 3 spheres. This reminds me of the 3 suns of the Dark Crystal series, in which when they merge, there is a great conjunction.
What's the Great Conjunction? You tell me.
The Great Conjunction is the end of the world! Oh, the beginning? And begin, all the same, big change.
This great conjunction in the original Dark Crystal film signifies the Skeksis and Mystics, the 2 halves of the same entity coming together in order to finally ascend. Thank you for watching. Keep up the great work. In Shadow.
So. Interessant, nicht wahr? Währenddessen habe ich hier was rausgesucht. Ich schiebe das mal kurz rüber. Und zwar, weil wir gerade von der Matrix ja sprechen, ne? Wir leben in einer Simulation. Was sind wir? Also das hat man ja in dem Film herausgehört, was wir sind. Wir sind ja nichts anderes wie Batterien, die benutzt werden, womit sich diese Wesen ja ernähren. So, was ist hier zu sehen? Schreibt mal im Chat. The Cube. Überall ist der Cube präsent. Ja, auch hier. Was sehen wir hier? Wir sehen ein Motherboard vom Computer. Dann sehen wir hier ein Teil vom Motor. Ja. Gehen wir mal weiter. Was sehen wir hier? Ah, das ist eine Industrieanlage, ne? Hier sieht man ja das Auto, hier. Ja. Aber wenn man sich hier die ganzen Verbindungen mal anschaut, ne, das ist wie Straße, Energienetz. Mal weiter. So, was sehen wir hier? Wir gehen ein bisschen raus. Dass man das mal als Ganzes sieht, ja? Das ist die Platine von hinten. Ja, hier ist CPU-Sockel. Hier für die Grafikkarten, PCI-Karten. Hier ist der Stromanschluss, Stromversorgung. Ne, Quatsch, hier sind die RAMs. Hier müsste, ja, auch Grafikkarte. Ne, hier sind die RAMs, Grafikkarte und so weiter. Aber hier sieht man ja auch, wenn man, ist ja jetzt egal, wie das Mainboard aufgebaut ist. Ich mache jetzt hier keinen Computerkurs. Hier sieht man ja auch die einzelnen Verbindungen, Stromversorgungen für die einzelnen Teile. Ja? Weil wir befinden uns ja nichts anderes. Hier, wir kleine Batterien bewegen uns in den quadratischen Häusern, sind dann abends, wenn wir schlafen, ein schön gebündeltes Paket. Ja, und dann verstreuen wir uns alle auf die Straße. Und wenn man sich dann mal auch dieses Verkehrsaufkommen mittlerweile betrachtet, ja, diese provozierten Staus, ich sag jetzt wirklich, die werden regelrecht provoziert. Überall wird gebaut auf den Autobahnen. Die Leute stehen, die regen sich auf. Energiequelle pur, ne? Also Monster AG, der Film dürfte ja jedem bekannt sein. Ne? Die Monster AG. Womit verdienen die ihr Geld? Genau mit dem. Und es repräsentiert nichts anderes wie das, wo wir leben und wie er vorhin im Video schön gesagt hat, was mit einer Fiktion, womit wir dann sozusagen ausgesaugt werden. So. Hier seht ihr ja auch, das müsste wenn ich richtig bin, in Kasachstan sein. Da ist jetzt keine Bildbeschreibung dabei. Hier sehen wir die zwei Türme, hat ja immer eine bestimmte Bedeutung. Da hinten ist, das ist wie so ein Kraftwerk. Die zwei Türme hier repräsentieren, ich wollte das ja eigentlich heute machen im Livestream. Ja, auch lass mich kurz nachdenken, ich bin gerade ein bisschen aus dem Konzept raus. Vielleicht weiß da jemand im Chat, kann mir da mal auf die Sprünge helfen. Also hier ist sozusagen das Kraftwerk, ja, die Kuppel, dann haben wir hier oben die Antenne. Warte mal, ich zoome mal noch ein bisschen rein. Oh, es geht nicht weiter. Hier haben wir die Antenne, ja. Warte mal, ich mach's anders. So, warte mal. Hier. Das wollte ich eigentlich separat machen. Aber wir können es ja hier mal kurz anschneiden. So, wartet. Das ist ein ewig langer Artikel. Wie gesagt, das machen wir separat. Hier zum Beispiel. Das Bild hier zum Beispiel, die Antenne, ja. Es gibt ja bekannterweise die Elektrizität, je höher du gehst, umso mehr Volt bekommen wir. Ja, früher gab es ja diese Zeppeline. Und die haben sich sozusagen hier aufgeladen in der Höhe. Und deswegen sind die Gebäude auch so hoch. Die haben immer eine bestimmte Höhe und dann zapfen sie dementsprechend auch, wie die Tesla-Türme, die ja gebaut werden, eine bestimmte Voltzahl an und die verteilen sie dann. Und das ist dann hier, wo ist das jetzt? Ach Quatsch, hier. Ja, wird dann verteilt auf die Umgebung, ne? So, jetzt suche ich die Begriffe hier. Habe jetzt auch nicht. Ah, hier seht ihr Tesla-Turm. Ist das groß genug? Ja. Die 2 Türme, da haben wir sozusagen WLAN-Strom, ne? Hier eine Entfernung von 260 Feet. Weiß jetzt nicht die Umrechnung. So sind auch die Städte heute konzipiert. Das ist sozusagen die alte Technologie, wo sie ja gekappt haben, aber ich sag mal, die ist nicht unnutzbar, die kann man immer noch benutzen. Hier diese sogenannten HARP-Anlagen, ja, mit Frequenzen, kommen wir auch auf das Thema Frequenzen zu sprechen. Der Ursprung, also das Thema, was ich gerne machen möchte, wäre dieser Ankh. Ja, was ist der Ankh? Ja, was symbolisiert der? Hier können wir mal, ich bin ja gerne faul, ne? So, machen wir das schön auf Deutsch, die Bilder auch auf Deutsch. So, was symbolisiert der Ankh? Der Ankh besteht aus 3 Teilen. Ja, also der Ankh ist ja ein Symbol aus dem Ägyptischen. Und hier steht der D-Jet, sagt man, rechts im Bild. Also das hier. Wurde verwendet, um die Spannung und das Ankh an sich ist, was verwendet wurde, um zu helfen mit dem Fluss des elektrischen Stroms. Also damit wurde der Fluss sozusagen konstant gehalten. Und so weiter und so weiter. Ich werde da jetzt nicht drauf eingehen. Ich werde mich da nochmal ein bisschen besser drauf vorbereiten. Auf jeden Fall, das ist entscheidend. Hier seht ihr auch dieses Jet. Ja, hier wie das Tesla-Turm, wie das aufgebaut ist. Und so sind die Gebäude auch aufgebaut. Sie haben verschiedene Schichten. Und wo ist denn hier das Ding? Ah, hier. Und zwar haben sie das hier oben so schön beschrieben. Da, ich suche mal. Ich habe das ja mir schon angeguckt. So ist auch der menschliche Körper aufgebaut. Ich sehe dann die Verbindung mit der Wirbelsäule. Ja, Osiris ist da auch ein Begriff. Na? Hier, dass ihr das mal so schon ein bisschen seht, was da auf uns zukommt. Und hier seht ihr dann auch den Aufbau. Noch ein Stückchen weiter, glaube ich, hier. Also hier, wie gesagt, oben habt ihr die Antenne, was ja auf den Kirchtürmen und so weiter überall auch zu finden ist. Und übrigens kommt noch das Stichwort Quecksilber dazu, weil meistens sind die Kugeln hier oben, oder hier sieht man das am besten, sind mit Quecksilber gefüllt. Quecksilber hat ja auch eine spezielle Funktion mit der Elektrizität. Dürften vielleicht auch einiges schon was davon gehört haben. Und so weiter. Und da baut sich das halt alles auf. Und das ist in diesem Ankh auch wieder zu finden. Ja, der Resonanzkörper und so weiter. Und dadurch wird der Äther sozusagen angezapft. Ne, und kann dann dazu sozusagen für den Strom verbraucht werden. Aber das ist jetzt nur mal am Rande. Wie gesagt, und die Städte, wenn ihr Google Earth nehmt und guckt euch eure Stadt an, auch Dörfer, würde ich sagen, erkennt ihr, dass immer die Straßen sozusagen die Verbindungen sind, so wie hier auf dem Mainboard, ne, auch die Flüsse und so weiter, wo das Ganze dann sozusagen versorgen mit Strom. Da seht ihr das nochmal. Das ist ja hier auch, dieser Haken hier, ich sag jetzt symbolisch gesehen, hat ja auch, wie gesagt, ist überall hier mit integriert. Na? Deswegen sind die Gebäude alle so aufgebaut. Nach Frequenzen, nach der heiligen Geometrie. Und hier oben, wie gesagt, ist in der Regel Quecksilber drin. Ich könnte ja auch mal rauszoomen, das macht das Ganze einfacher. Wie gesagt, da gehen wir nochmal speziell drauf ein. Möchte ich mich auch ein bisschen besser vorbereiten, weil ich bin in so vielen Themen drin, kann man sich alles auch jetzt nicht so auf Anhieb speichern. Deswegen auch die Matrix. Also was sind wir? Elektrisches Universum und so weiter. Diese Technologie wurde genommen, das heißt, wir sind noch mehr gezwungen, Energie aufzubringen, sprich Geld zu verdienen und sind von bestimmten Ressourcen getrennt worden. Nicht nur im Kopf. Grenzen, die Barrieren sind ja meistens im Kopf, ne? Die kann man ja auch lösen, aber gestaltet sich trotzdem schwierig. Und das ist das System, was wir halt aktuell erleben. Und wer, wie gesagt, sich ein bisschen mit dieser ganzen Thematik beschäftigt, mit dem Cube und so weiter, findet auch den Weg erstmal da, vielleicht eine Lösung zu finden, herauszukommen. Erstmal aus dieser Schwierigkeit hier, ja. Das wollte ich euch nochmal gezeigt haben hier. Elektrizität, Tartaria ist ja da das Schlagwort eigentlich, ne? Und die Gebäude sind ja, wie gesagt, weltweit identisch. Variieren nur ganz minimal mit ihrer Form. Und wenn ich die Dokumentation über die Barockzeit so sehe, dann kriege ich als ein Lachflash. Aber gut, Komödie ist manchmal gut sich anzuschauen. Betrifft auch Dokumentation. Ne? So, hier seht ihr Resonanzkörper. Die heilige Geometrie in den Fenstern. Gepaart noch mit Farben, Scheiben in verschiedenen Farben und so weiter. Das alles im Gesamtkonzept ist das schon eine immense ja, Aufladungspotenzial. Auf der anderen Seite hat es ja auch, wenn innen drinne die Orgel läuft oder sowas zum Beispiel. Man könnte auch sagen, das ist dann wie so ein Subwoofer, ne? Hier nochmal Platine und hier die Stadt. Also hier so Vergleich nochmal. Das ist hier so die Platine. Ne, alle wohnen hier an diesen Knotenpunkten. Und so sieht das Ganze für uns aus. Ne? Faszinierend, oder? Faszinierend. Und ich denke auch, und ich glaube, ihr seid der gleichen Meinung, die Menschen spüren so langsam, dass es in der Stadt doch nicht so schön ist. Ne? Man fühlt sich wirklich so erdrückt, ermüdend, gestresst. Und alles Mögliche. Und die Leute, wo auf dem Land leben oder auf dem Dorf, sind in der Regel weniger gestresst. No? Ich finde das Thema faszinierend. Ist auch unendlich diskutierbar. Und wieder hier Cube. Wo du hinschaust, Cube. Wir leben in einem Cube. Im Kleinen wie in einem großen Cube. Der größte Cube ist nun mal die Erde. Obendrauf. Na? So, das sind hier 76 Bilder. Ihr seht, der ganze, alles Verbindungen hier. Die Starforts, also die Sternenbauten. Na? Wie gesagt, können wir mal auf jeden Fall nochmal so ein Special machen. Wir haben ja auch ein Video darüber schon gemacht. Starforts. So, das mal hier am Rande. Jetzt vielleicht noch zum Abschluss. Kontroverses Video. Kann sich jeder eigenes Bild drüber machen. Was ich hier nochmal, das ist der Bodycode, genau, das haben wir gestern gezeigt. Ich suche jetzt mal die Stelle. War das hier am Anfang? Wo man die flache Erde sieht. Was auch immer. Schaut euch das Video auch wirklich nochmal in Ruhe an. Und dann können wir gemeinsam darüber diskutieren. Hier. War das hier? So, ne? Sieht man das nochmal? Wie im Kleinen, so auch im Großen, ja. Wir sind im Mutterleib, the Worm, also das englische Mutterleib, the Womb, habe ich das richtig ausgesprochen? The Womb, ja. Und hier ist sozusagen, nach ihm seiner Ansicht, ist hier oben sozusagen das Firmament. Hier unten ist dann, wo wir geboren werden. Wir gehen dann mit dem Kopf hier durch und so weiter und kommen dann in die Matrix. Wie gesagt, das werden wir jetzt auch nochmal im Laufe der Zeit uns gemütlich anschauen. Hier sieht das Ganze nochmal aus einer anderen Perspektive. Und jetzt kommen wir auf den Punkt, worauf ich eigentlich hinaus wollte, ist deswegen jetzt nochmal dieses kontroverse Video zum Abschluss. Wir haben die Sonne, den Mond, die flache Erde, den Nordpol, hier die grüne Aurora Borealis, sprich die Pyramide. Und was ist hier unten? Ja? Der Baum des Lebens, ihr kennt die Bilder vom Baum des Lebens. Entschuldigung, gibt es ja viele. Hier zum Beispiel. Ne, das ist mit dem Gehirn. Und meine Maus hat sich... Na gut, ich bin jetzt mal auf OBS. Mein Monitor streikt. Ne, finde ich jetzt nicht. Okay, gut. Ist auch nicht schlimm. Wie gesagt, das wäre interessant. Habt ihr Lust? Noch 9 Minuten. Kontroverses Video. Und dann würde ich sagen, machen wir für heute ein bisschen Schluss. Schreibt einem Chat, was ihr davon haltet. Sind wir noch alle da? Ich suche gerade hier mein Livestream-Fenster. Irgendwie verschwunden. Naja, gut. Bodycode. Das zeige ich euch morgen. Hier. Weg mit. Wie gesagt, hier. Dann lass uns mal starten. Ich mache mal hier ein bisschen leiser. Also wie gesagt, kontrovers, ja. Ich sag das jetzt extra. Wir haben wie viel Uhr? Ja, perfekt. Also, ne? Alle, die unter 18 sind, ihr wisst. Nichts der Mama sagen. Dann schaut euch das mal an. Ton? Wäre auch nicht
Even
schlecht.
further into this flat Earth thing, we were talking in the previous video how all the dimensions are layered on top of each other, going up the tree of life. So what we have is we have the black hole sun beneath us, which causes the sun and the moon to spiral around as over the event horizon. As we see over here, what's going on is that there's the black hole sun, which causes the spiral, like the drain going down a drain. Okay, and as you're going down the drain, there's also the kickback that they show you black holes having a kickback. So it would be the astral light or the astrally light of the black hole that the spirit world lives on. Makes perfect sense. Now here in our little world over here, shit rolls downhill. See, something's changed, people. Somebody pointed out, I forget the name of the person, but they pointed out in the comment section, we kings are now workings. We have to work now, because now we were kings. That's fucking great. That's great. It's true. It's true. And shit rolls downhill. Everybody knows that. And you can see here, like, in Donkey Kong, you know, it looks like this. The CDs are stacked, just like Donkey Kong, they show you. Donkey Kong, and shit rolls downhill. Okay? They show you this cosmic cow or something like that. Indian people worship the cow or the bull. And I can see how that Makes sense. And then you see we're the cosmic womb. We're here in the cosmic womb. Okay. You see the bottom of the tree. I can see how these things could be viewed at, from different peoples in different areas have different perspectives of this tree. I imagine in Kabbalah, it probably matches up to something like this, like what I'm pointing out here. And no, I don't really get into all that. I've seen, you have to have somebody teach you that stuff. And I don't have a teacher. I could go and try and read as much as I can, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. This grid that they show us, or they tell us that it's the gridiron that you're trapped on. And when the soul leaves its body, it's not trained to do anything but really just stand there and hope that somebody comes to save them. And it's not that you immediately get birthed out of another womb or something. It's that you're standing there looking around and you can see a lot of stuff. For example, you can see the living and the dead. The living do what the living do, and the dead do what the dead do, and then there's all kinds of other stuff around. And they show you in like R.I.P.I. Rest in Peace PD, in Ghostbusters. They have technology to capture you, and they rub it in your fucking face. It's that they're laughing because you're chasing down your own soul in Pac-Man, and you're laughing while you're watching Beetlejuice, and you can't see what's really going on here. There's a dual sun thing going on here, but it's the same sun. It's that a black hole is a light hole on one end, okay? And it's like a loop, if you can imagine that. But there's a kickback of astral light, and we're in like our own little, like they show you the Torah shape, we're in our own little bubble. It's like a little bubble. And all the planes of existence are stacked on top of each other. So the archons are living between the CDs, if you can imagine that. In the spaces between the CDs, you have the ethereal plane, which is your internet connection, is the Ethernet connection. They're watching you through all your internet devices. The internet is conscious. It's clearly got a virus in it. And it makes sense that if you can get a view of this from the right perspective, then you can see that you're already in the afterlife already. Okay, there's this chi or vril or cosmic whatever energy you want to call it is running through creation. It's running through you right now. You can learn to harness it. You can do a lot of things, but you're not doing them because you're too busy. You're too busy, and you got to start off by planting some roots in building up. Like I say, you start out each day with one single minute devoted to building some energy simply in the palm of your hands that others refer to as chi or vil or whatever. You just stop for a minute when you wake up for 1 minute and you picture yourself here. There's a fire hose, kickback energy from the black hole sun. It's running through creation, and it's like fire hoses running up your feet, through your hands, out your eyes, or whatever you want to direct it at. It's that you have this thing blowing around you because it's got to stop up at you, and you're like a dam. You dam it up. You dam up the flow, and it builds up around you, and you can harness it, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. What I recommend is that you start flicking your halos, okay? If you can imagine a torus shape around you, and that there's that spot above your head, it would be like a ring. You just flick it like there's really that invisible field around you, and it's green. Why do you think all the plants are green? I suspect that everything is green because this energy, like they show you in Futurama, the green energy underneath, and the mutants are mutating because of this green energy. They're telling you that this energy is running through creation. It's the astral light that causes the creation. So that's why the black hole portion of this system is the creating portion of it, because it provides the spiral for the sun to go around. Something seeped in is either projecting the moon up there. There's really devices that are running around, flying around, and it's because it's not gravity, it's density. They're less dense than you. Gravity does not exist. Gravity was only created to explain why you weren't flying off the Earth as it spun at 1,000 miles an hour. That's clearly a flat Earth plane. And you know what's crazy? Your parents, you ever... Look, people, this is pretty crazy. So you're the demonstrator, you're the one that does the demonstrating. You, if the place goes pandemonium, okay, the dimensions, ion demons, okay, the demiurge is probably a demon plague. And now take a look at this, people. It's that when you have children, it's like conjuring up little demons, okay? Because when they grow up, you're going to help them give demonstrations at school. How was your demonstration today, son? Listen, everything's fucked up. When I see the caduceus, what I see is a mother and a father coming together, creating a child, okay? And you can see this is 50-50. This is half of your mom, half of your dad came together to trap you here in this imaginary world. And it's like a battery, like they tell you it's a battery. Energy goes from one place to another place, and then there's the kickback, which is the ass-trailing light from the black hole sun that the astral world is living on. You understand? And this is pretty simple. But there's some pretty smart something, whatever it is, the archons, whatever fucking name you want to call it, is in this computer. And what they're trying to tell you is that with these images is that they're coming after your fucking soul, is what I'm telling you. That's what it means. So, try to envision this. Parents, they burn up the sheets having children, right? You're conjuring up a little demon. It's crazy. It's crazy. But that's what you say. I burn up the sheets. And, you know, you have these rings, these satanic symbols, and your X, and it's just crazy. You got a bun in the oven, right? You're just so cute. You're good enough to eat. Okay, then you go to church and you take your body of Christ and your blood of Christ and you practice your cannibal blood magic. And your kids go to school to learn their magic spells. This is funny as shit, people. It's that everybody you know is fucking retarded. You need to get to my channel and catch up on reality.
Ja.
Happy Pi Day!
Ja, Happy Pi Day, alles klar. Oh, meine Maus ist wieder echt unglaublich. Was sagt ihr dazu? Ich kann jetzt hier echt nicht agieren. Warte mal, ich versuche den mal auszutricksen.
Hey guys doing? Thanks for joining.
Der Kanal hier, wie gesagt, ist interessant. Bin da durch Zufall drauf gestoßen. Der hat 2 verschiedene YouTube-Kanäle, der sich auch, wie gesagt, mit der schwarzen Sonne beschäftigt und so weiter. Ich verlinke euch das auch gerne, wer sich dafür interessiert. Interessante Aspekte, die er hier nennt. Wie gesagt, schaut euch das in Ruhe an. Ich habe das jetzt alles hier gesammelt. Ja, ansonsten jetzt noch Fragen. Mir sind ja noch sehr viele Menschen hier noch dabei. 87 sehe ich gerade. Und ja, ich bin echt glücklich, dass so viele noch dabei sind. Lasst mich überlegen. Fällt mir noch irgendwas ein, jetzt so spontan? Also wie gesagt, es gibt wirklich in allen Facetten interessante Themen. Was das betrifft, The Cube. Ach, ich hätte vielleicht noch was. Warte mal. Wenn ihr Interesse habt, ja, weil ihr könnt ja auch mal schauen, wie ich hier gerne so zwischen diesen Medien hier rumzwitsche. Mal so, ich suche mir das jetzt nochmal hier raus. So, und zwar... hier, der Kanal Enter the Stars ist, wie gesagt, der, wo ich gestern mit euch geschaut habe. Und da war ein interessanter Aspekt mit dem Baum des Lebens genannt worden. Und zwar in dem Film Matrix seht ihr das. Mit dem Baum des Lebens. Und zwar, wenn ihr euch erinnert, ich frage mal kurz in die Runde, Matrix-Trilogie ist euch ein Begriff? Also ich kann mir nicht vorstellen, dass es keiner gesehen hat. Resurrection nur zu empfehlen, reinzuschauen. Nicht wegen den Action-Szenen, sondern einfach der Symbolik ist es sehr, sehr interessant. Wir werden hier auch noch, ich bin wie gesagt noch am Übersetzen von einem 2-Stunden-Video, was die ersten 3 Teile betrifft, die auseinandergenommen werden. In dem Bereich Symboliken. Ach, hier übrigens der Film The Cube dürfte euch auch, also der wusste ich, der ist schon etwas älter, ich glaube aus den 80ern ist der. Der hier ist wirklich genial, der Typ. Also ich habe, wie ihr seht, schon einige Videos mir von ihm angeschaut. Ich suche jetzt gerade das eine Video, ich muss jetzt nur aufpassen, wie ich das zeige hier. Ich mache mal Pause, sonst kriege ich hier wirklich Probleme. Und suche die Stelle raus. Ihr seht es jetzt hier schon auf der linken Seite. Ja, ich spule mal hier mit dem Cursor gerade ein bisschen. Wo er die Stelle zeigt. Ja. Das hat mit Magnetismus auch zu tun, mit Kupfer. Wie gesagt, das möchte ich gerne extra machen. Und hier kann man das erkennen. Ich mache mal Großbildschirm. Der Baum des Lebens. Also er sagt, hier innerhalb, wo wir befinden uns alle hier in dieser Kapsel. Ja. Also das Bild dürfte jedem bekannt sein. Und das sind die Früchte. Also die Kapsel symbolisiert die Früchte, ja, die geerntet werden. Und hier seht ihr auch diese Erntemaschinen, die Morge. Und hier, da gibt es eine Stelle im Film, bei Resurrection sieht man das, wo Trinity und Neo sich gegenüber in einer Kapsel befinden. Jeder an einem Strang. Und im Hintergrund seht ihr dann sozusagen das Portal zur Matrix. Das ist ja genial, ja. Also die zeigen uns alles in den Filmen. Ich schaue gerne die Filme nicht, dass ihr das aus meiner Sicht mal seht. Ich schaue mir die Filme alle generell an und versuche mir die Symboliken oder das, was sie uns hier erklären und sagen, was sie ja irgendwo müssen, herauszulesen, ja. Und wie gesagt, hier der Baum des Lebens sozusagen und hier hinten sozusagen das Portal zur Matrix. Ja? Das mal so am Rande nebenbei. Hier sieht man das nochmal größer, ne? Die Früchte. Das sind wir. Na, wir sind die Batterien, wir tun die sozusagen dann versorgen. Hier seht ihr das nochmal, ne? Ach, das ist aber heute hier echt. Hier geht es wie gesagt um diesen Magnetismus mit dem großen Kupfer. Da habe ich auch schon im Kanal ein interessantes Video gepostet. Das erklärt er dann hier, wie das Ganze funktioniert und die Verbindung mit Kupfer. Also ihr seht, das ist so umfangreich alles. Das kann man nur Stück für Stück durcharbeiten. Ich gebe euch den Tipp, geht in den Kanal rein, Enter the Stars und schaut euch da ein paar Videos an. Tut euch schon mal wirklich mal vorab informieren und ihr werdet sehen, das sind immer Verbindungen zu allen möglichen Facetten. So, gut. Gut, ich denke mal, ich glaube, das reicht für heute, was die ganze Thematiken betrifft. Metatron war ja der Einstieg. Geblieben sind wir beim Cube, weil der Cube ist der Ursprung zum Ganzen. Ja, das so von meiner Seite her. Ich hoffe, es hat euch soweit gefallen. Unser Kino. Wenn ihr noch was schreiben möchtet, dann schreibt ihr das jetzt bitte. Vielleicht kann ich hier und da noch eine Frage beantworten. Ja, wir leben nur am Tag. Es gibt keine Nacht, oder? Ich sag auch nicht gerne gute Nacht oder guten Morgen oder sonst irgendwas, sondern lieber eine gute Zeit. Weil guten Morgen, das ist eigentlich immer ein Tag später. Was auch vielleicht noch erst sagen möchte, was mir in letzter Zeit sehr stark auffällt, ist auch dieses Reverse Speaking. Ich benutze ja, oder wir benutzen ja ein Videoschneidprogramm, womit wir unsere Videos machen. Und es ist wirklich möglich, die Videos in echt, also in normaler Zeit rückwärts laufen zu lassen und sich dementsprechend das Ganze auch rückwärts anzuhören. Und es ist unglaublich, was man da teilweise da hört. Auch Reverse Speech solltet ihr euch mal anschauen. Das ist mittlerweile auch so langsam, kommt es in die virale Geschichte. Das Pensum, das Tempo, was wirklich jetzt in letzter Zeit hier stattfindet, das ist so immens hoch. Selbst wir kommen nicht mehr mit den Themen hinterher hier im deutschen Raum. Und wie gesagt, mir ist diese Oberfläche zweitrangig. Mir geht es persönlich mehr in die Tiefe. Deswegen zeige ich euch auch teilweise komplexe Videos, die ich mir auch gerne 2-, 3-mal anschaue, weil immer wieder etwas Neues herauszulesen ist. Und ja, also Reverse Speaking, wirklich sehr interessant, diese unterschwellige Programmierung. Mir fällt jetzt da spontan nichts ein. Lass mich nachdenken. Ja, da gibt es so bestimmte Begrifflichkeiten, die benutzt man tagtäglich. Also wer die anständige deutsche Sprache benutzt, der benutzt es nicht. Aber die Jugendlichen eher, auch in den Liedern und so weiter. Ganz interessant, Reverse Speaking. Ja, genau. Da hört man auch die Wahrheit raus. Gibt es auch, glaube ich, einen ganz genialen Telegram-Kanal von einem Deutschen. Ich muss jetzt überlegen, wie der heißt. Vielleicht beim nächsten Livestream mich nochmal dran erinnern. Ich werde es mal raussuchen. Ganz interessant, was er da heraushören kann. Das muss man, glaube ich, auch am Anfang ein bisschen trainieren, das Ganze. Richtig. Leben ist gleich Nebel. So, wie gesagt, ich hoffe, ihr konnt wirklich einiges mitnehmen heute an interessanten Überschriften, Themen. Mir hat es wirklich sehr viel Spaß gemacht, mit euch die Zeit hier zu verbringen. Mache ich wirklich sehr gerne. Wie ich die Zeit habe, nutze ich sie. In der Regel auch gerne spontan. Das funktioniert immer am besten. Ja. Ich glaube, das ist bei den meisten Stars, Musikern, ist das generell innen drin verschlüsselt, was die da singen. Verdreht, ja, das ist die Matrix, die verdreht halt alles. Das ist generell so, ne? Weil hier geht es ja um eine bestimmte Sache, was sie ja von uns brauchen. Danke. Wir gehen wirklich gerne in die Tiefe der Thematiken. Manchmal auch teilweise komplex für mich am Anfang. Lieber stotter ich dann, aber ich habe euch ja mit an der Seite und bin auch für jede Korrektur dankbar. Weil wie gesagt, das ist so umfangreich alles. Und wie im letzten Video jetzt auch. Also manche verstehen es überhaupt nicht. Gut. Nochmal so zur Erinnerung, ich werde versuchen, das Thema mit dem Ankh aufzuarbeiten. mit den ganzen Energiefrequenzen. Wird wahrscheinlich auch wieder ein bisschen oberflächlich, weil das Hauptthema wird der Angst sein. Ich suche jetzt noch die Verbindung raus zu den Portalen. Und ich gebe euch noch ein Stichwort und ihr werdet euch freuen. Schimmel. Mit dem Schimmel werden wir noch irgendwann kommen, weil das ist sehr, sehr wichtig. Da werde ich euch auch ein Video von ihm hier zeigen. Es ist mega. Es ist wirklich mega. Was er da aufgeschlüsselt hat, das müsst ihr unbedingt erfahren. Ich werde das übernächsten Stream werde ich schauen, das mit euch anschauen. Die Verbindung zwischen den Portalen und dem Schimmel. Kann sich jetzt keiner was drunter vorstellen. Wird sehr, sehr interessant werden. Ich werde mir auch da Hilfe von meinem Team suchen. Werde versuchen, Telegram mit meinem Team hier einzubauen. Wir werden das einfach testen, ob das funktioniert. Muss ja irgendwie funktionieren. Dass ihr auch das Team mal vielleicht kennenlernt, wenn sie Zeit haben und Lust haben, wovon ich ausgehe. Und da kann man gemeinsam da auch drüber diskutieren. Wie gesagt, Discord habe ich auch, aber wenn ihr eh alle in Telegram drin seid, könnte man das versuchen so zu organisieren, dass wir einen Sprachchat parallel öffnen und dementsprechend dann euch je nachdem freischalten. Müssen wir schauen. Wir müssen auch ein bisschen experimentieren, aber das machen wir auch hier gerne. So, was schreibst du, Britta? Bitte bringe welche Struktur das Nervenwasser und das Kielerwasser produzieren. Ich glaube, ich weiß schon, wovon du redest. Du redest von diesem Gehirnwasser da, ne? Unter anderem. Das wurde gestern ja auch schon angesprochen. Diese Flüssigkeit. Ist das richtig, Britta? Schimmel an der Wand, Lotti. Ich rede von diesem Schimmel an der Wand. Die Verbindung Schimmel, Portale und so weiter. Ja, genau. Ich werde da diesen Teil rausnehmen. Mit dem Gehirnwasser, was er hier gezeigt hat in dem Video. Shadow Decoded, das ist jetzt hier nicht dabei. Bei Body Code hat er da drüber gesprochen. Also werde ich schauen, dass ich dieses Kapitel mal rausziehe und dann noch Stoff dazu finde, um das anzusprechen. Was meinst du, mit welcher Frequenz die Videos sind? Lieber Gigolo. Ja, Pilzportal. Wird interessant. Der Ankh, wenn ihr wisst, also wenn der Ankh hat ja nicht nur eine Frequenz, also hat ja was mit Frequenzen zu tun, mit Strom, Elektrizität, zu Körper. Eine Verstärker. Das ist ja ein Verstärker. Mit dem Ankh könnte man ja theoretisch auch einiges andere Sachen anstellen, ja? Wenn ihr ein bisschen das, habe ich Bilder? Ja, ich werde es euch beim nächsten Mal, ich will jetzt nicht zu viel zeigen. Danke, Arthur. Sprachchat, wie gesagt, ich werde das mal mit einbauen. Ich bin mit dem Sprachchat jetzt momentan ein bisschen sensibilisiert, seid mir nicht böse, ja? Wir werden schauen. Ich werde es versuchen einzurichten. Da müssen aber noch 1, 2 Admins dabei sein, die das Ganze sozusagen im Hintergrund steuern. Lasst mich da ein bisschen tüfteln. Wie gesagt, das müssen wir auch testen. Ob wir Sprachchat und YouTube verbinden können, würde mich freuen. Ansonsten würde ich das über Discord machen, wenn Telegram meine Ressourcen hier nicht ausschöpft. Ich hatte schon ein paar Mal den Fall, dass Telegram wirklich Ressourcen mir hier wegnimmt und dann wird der Stream drunter leiden. So, aller gut. Wie gesagt, Schimmel behalte es mal einfach nur als Überschrift für euch und Portale und so weiter. Wird, denke ich, sehr interessant werden. Ansonsten, ja, ich würde sagen, wir ruhen uns jetzt aus. lassen alles ein bisschen sacken. Und ja, vielleicht morgen Abend, wenn ihr Lust habt, können wir nochmal einen Livestream machen. Ich suche mal ein Thema raus. Vielleicht bin ich auch soweit, dann werde ich das Thema Ankh mit euch zusammen ansprechen, werde es mit euch zusammen durchgehen. Und dann könnte man vielleicht auch switchen zu den Portalen und dann können wir weitermachen. Okay. Discord könnte ich dir kurz nochmal einblenden, den Link. Warte. So, rechts oben siehst du den Link vom Discord. Ich denke, das müsstest du lesen können. Ansonsten müsste ich mal gut schauen. Gib mir mal eine Sekunde. Wie kann ich das hier... Discord, ich bin ja auch ein bisschen... Ach, da sind ja sogar schon welche drin. Ach Gott, Leute, ich habe euch gar nicht bemerkt. Entschuldigt mich bitte. Ne, verzeiht mir bitte. So, hier ist Discord. Schaut. Sucht mal nach Tartaria. Ich denke mal, das müsste funktionieren. Für alle, die Discord erfahrener sind. Ansonsten, wie gesagt, ich tue das hier oben in der Ecke, rechts oben im Bildschirm, seht ihr den Link zum Discord-Server. Und seid so gut, benehmt euch dort auch ein wenig. Na? Das wäre schön. Jetzt muss ich mal, warte mal, also Main Channel. Ne, hier raus. Einladung erstellen. Kopieren. Schaut mal, ich verlinke euch das im Chat. Ich bin ja nicht immer verfügbar, gell? So nebenbei. So. Hab euch das verlinkt im Chat. Also ich könnte jetzt noch stundenlang hier Livestream machen. So langsam habe ich das Gefühl. Wie spät haben wir es eigentlich? Oder wie jung ist der Tag? 18. Hm. Ich würde sagen, wir machen Feierabend. Und morgen Abend denke ich vielleicht nochmal was Interessantes, okay? Ansonsten ruht euch wirklich aus, entspannt euch. War wirklich interessant heute das Thema. Ja. Bis dahin wünsche ich euch alles ruhige, gute, entspanntes, Liebes und so weiter. Bis dahin, habt euch wohl. Bis bald. Tschüssi.
I was doing some research for an upcoming video and